When my husband and I got out of the car, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law eagerly asked him, "Hey, Paul, what's up with this car? It's amazing. Glad you finally decided to join us in the better part of society, but buying such an expensive car out of the blue is a bold move." My husband laughed and told them, "This isn't my car, it belongs to Jasmine's father." Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law gasped, saying, "What?" Then my parents stepped out of the car, and my in-laws were shocked when they saw what they were wearing. Such an expensive suit, I recognize that brand. Why are Jasmine's parents dressed so well? My name is Jasmine. I'm 28 years old and work in an office. I married my husband, Paul, last year. Paul has always been kind and caring since we started dating, and I was so happy to marry him. We share the household chores because we both work. Paul has lived alone for a long time and is great at taking care of things around the house. Sometimes he even cooks better than me, depending on the dish. We support each other and have a happy life together. But there's one thing that's been getting in the way of our happiness: my in-laws. They assume I'm poor and treat me poorly because of it. Why do they think I'm poor? I think it started when we had a dinner party to meet each other's families before we got married. My in-laws, Paul's parents, his sister, and him, come from a wealthy background. His father worked as a banker and had a lot of money. Everything he wears is from a high-end brand. They seem to think that wearing expensive things means you have status. Paul, however, isn't interested in those things at all. He prefers buying second-hand clothes online and loves them, sometimes more than their original price. So when I met my in-laws for the first time, I was surprised by how different they were from Paul. I even wondered if Paul was adopted. I later realized that Paul lived alone for so long because he didn't share their values. He started living on his own after he went to college. Since they think that being rich makes you better than others, they looked down on me and my parents when we met for the first time. My dad runs a small factory. When my in-laws found that out, they made fun of him right away. He runs a factory, and yes, maybe he's the president, but a factory with a name I've never heard of must be poor. No big bank would ever give him a loan. They said all this while meeting us for the first time, which made me question their character. If Paul hadn't warned me beforehand, I would have been furious. My parents had also been prepared, so they stayed calm, even when my in-laws mocked us. Well, it's true we run a small business, but we're grateful we can keep it going. We can pay our employees every month. I wonder how many employees you have. Oh, I heard Jasmine has an older brother. Oh, he's working today. He can't join us. Is he on a business trip? Does your brother work for a good company? My son works at my company. When my dad said that, my in-laws all laughed. You mean it's a family business? A family that can't even take a day off must not be doing well. They kept saying terrible things about my family. Paul kept asking them to stop, but they wouldn't listen. In the end, Paul had to cut the visit short. That's why I don't have a good opinion of my in-laws. They made fun of my family, too. Honestly, some people might have ended the marriage over something like this, but I love my husband more than that, so I decided to marry him. As long as I don't have to deal with my in-laws, we can live happily and peacefully. The truth is, my husband doesn't like his family either. I was angry with them for mocking my family, so we avoided visiting my in-laws unless we absolutely had to. But about a year after we got married, I guess they got tired of us not showing up. They started pressuring us to spend time with them. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law began coming to our house often. They would say whatever they wanted. Paul doesn't come home at all. It must be because she's trying to stop him. She's probably jealous of our lives. I understand. We live at a higher standard than the poor, but I do hope you'll have a baby soon. If you don't have an heir, she's just a worthless wife trying to get rich. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law would visit from when I got home from work until my husband arrived. I get home early because my job lets me leave on time, but my husband usually works overtime and gets home just before 9 p.m. So, for about 3 hours, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law would come over to criticize me. Your apartment is so small. Paul works for a good company. You should live in a nicer house. But my husband and I think our place is big enough for us. It's not your husband, it's you, right? Don't impose your ideas on Paul. There's so much plain food in the fridge. Don't look in my fridge without permission. You don't have caviar or fancy wines. We don't have anything like that. How boring. Why did Paul marry you? A poor, money-seeking, boring woman is rare. You can say that, but if you touch Paul's money even a little bit, you'll regret it. We'll make sure you're erased from society. They would make fun of me, threaten me, and ridicule me, then leave. I'd tell my husband about it, and he'd scold them, but they kept coming over, showing no remorse. They even ambushed me at home when I came back from work. Every time I came home, I felt depressed. How could they keep picking on me like this? But my mother-in-law and sister-in-law didn't stop trying to make me feel small. It all became too much for me, and I had a mental breakdown. I started spending time at a cafe until my husband finished work. Then I would go home with him. When my mother-in-law and sister-in-law saw me returning with my husband, they said, "You're like a pest, taking away Paul's freedom like that." Honestly, it was more disgusting that they waited for 3 hours just to try and tear me down. My husband was fed up too. He even went to his father for help, but my father-in-law was just like my mother-in-law. He said that having a poor wife was rare for them, and if things didn't change, it would ruin our marriage. That's when I decided to take drastic action. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but my in-laws had pushed me too far, and I wasn't going to back down. A few days later, my husband and I decided to visit them. My in-laws were thrilled when we told them Paul was bringing his wife home with him, but then, my mother-in-law said something horrible. "I'm so happy to see Jasmine after such a long time. I wonder what it's like to be a wife beater." We arrived at my in-laws' house for the weekend, and when we got out of the car, they rushed outside, excited to see us. "Hey, Paul, what's with this car? It's amazing. I'm glad you're finally living on our side of society, but buying such a fancy car out of the blue is a bold move, isn't it?" My husband laughed and said, "This isn't my car, it's Jasmine's father's." "What?" my mother-in-law and sister-in-law said at the same time. Then my parents got out of the car. My in-laws were completely shocked when they saw how my parents were dressed. "What an expensive-looking suit. I recognize that brand. Why are Jasmine's parents dressed so well?" And then, my brother stepped out of the car, tall, 6 feet, looking like a model. My in-laws' eyes widened in disbelief when they saw my brother wearing the same high-end brown suit as my father. "Who is that handsome guy?" "Nice to meet you. I'm Simon, Jasmine's brother." My in-laws were stunned. Seeing my family so different from the last time they saw me, my husband was fed up, saying, "What the hell are you doing?" and urged them to show my family around the house. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law quickly invited us in, acting like the complete opposite of how they were before. They led us into the living room and said, "We'll prepare some tea for you right away." They were curious and asked my father, "How can you afford such luxury items?" It was unbelievable how quickly their attitude changed just because of how we looked. My father responded calmly, "My factory is small, but the parts we make are unique. We receive orders from big Japanese and foreign companies." My father's words left my in-laws speechless. Their faces turned pale. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law suddenly became polite to me, but my father-in-law stayed completely silent. My sister-in-law, however, was very interested in my brother. She asked him a lot of questions. "What kind of work do you do at your father's company?" "I'm good at English, so I handle organizing meetings with international companies, and I travel abroad for half of the year." "That's really impressive. Are you single, Simon?" "No, I'm married." "That's too bad, but I think I'd be a better match for you than your wife. What do you think? Maybe we could go out for dinner sometime?" My sister-in-law started flirting with my married brother right in front of me and my parents. Honestly, I couldn't help but admire her audacity, but now, I was ready to make her regret this behavior. She was going to face consequences, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. My brother looked at me and nodded, then turned to my sister-in-law and said, "Are you serious? You think you're more desirable than my wife?" My wife was a former model. She's highly educated, and her father is the president of a well-known company. You're no match for her, no matter how you look at it. It's funny how some people, who only have a little wealth, forget their place, isn't it? I don't talk badly about you, but you should know your place and stick to your own path. My brother's words struck a nerve, and my sister-in-law was so stunned she couldn't speak. She was in shock and seemed on the verge of passing out. Finally, my father spoke to my in-laws. "I don't care how much money other people have. Money is important, but you can't measure a person's value by it. We should focus on being human, not obsessed with wealth." "I'm sorry we were harsh earlier," my father said, bowing his head in apology. My in-laws were now completely stunned and quickly apologized. Since then, they have never tried to bully me again. In fact, they've started contacting me regularly, trying to flatter me. It's a bit annoying how often they reach out now. By the way, My parents and brother aren't the type to flaunt luxury brands or boast about their wealth. They simply helped me with my plan this time. My father prefers to wear an old suit, even if it's cheap, and he's not interested in expensive brands. My brother is very kind and doesn't look down on others, which is why his wife's father really likes him. He even asked my brother to take over the company because he thinks he'd make a better successor than his own son. I'm sorry I put my family through something they're not used to, I said as we were all exhausted on the way home. After that, I was able to return to a peaceful married life with my husband. I haven't visited my in-laws since, but my husband still visits them during Thanksgiving and Christmas. Since that event, my in-laws have changed. They seem to have lost some of their confidence, or maybe they've repented. They no longer brag about their wealth like they used to. My husband even says he feels most comfortable around them now. I'm not sure if they'll ever go back to their old ways, but for now, I'm just glad the issue has been resolved. I will continue to take care of my husband and my family, and I'll try to live a humble life. They thought they were superior, but in reality, my family has much more wealth than they do. My in-laws should be ashamed of themselves. I don't think it's right to keep looking down on others just because they have less. I'm glad you were able to give your in-laws a good scolding, and I hope you continue to live in harmony with your family.
A sense of futility permeated my role as Alex's wife, as the resonance of his demanding voice cut through the clatter of dishes like a sharp knife. "Era, bring me some tea now," he commanded, impatience evident in his incredulous tone. My hand, immersed in soapy water, hesitated. "Hold on, I'm doing the dishes," I responded. His disdainful interruption came swiftly. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" I started to explain, only to be met with a harsh verdict. "What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, please." Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, voiced her opinion from the living room, devouring a slice of cake taken from the fridge, her eyes gleaming with malice. A sigh escaped me as I glanced at the towering pile of dishes. "There are so many. Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife." Alex's voice lashed out like a whip, each word stinging. I, Era, a 28-year-old working mother, found myself ensnared in a life that resembled more of a prison than a home. Married at 23, my hope for love and companionship had given way to the overbearing presence of Alex and his demanding mother. Our 4-year-old son remained the sole source of joy in my bleak world. Living in Alex's parents' house, a decision forced upon me after my father-in-law's passing, felt like a perpetual struggle. Initially sympathizing with Mrs. Whitmore's supposed grief, it soon became apparent that I was nothing more than a pawn in her cruel game of domestic tyranny. Cooking, cleaning, working, my efforts were never enough. Meals were either left untouched or criticized harshly. "The stir-fry is so half-hearted," Mrs. Whitmore would scoff. "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd respond, attempting to keep my voice steady. "That's why I hate backtalk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. Their cruelty escalated over time, shifting from harsh words to a chilling silence, ignoring me entirely as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. 5 suffocating years passed, and as Alex and I turned 35 and 33 respectively, the oppressive atmosphere remained unchanged. My mother-in-law, now 63, seemed to thrive on my misery. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy realization settled over me. My existence seemed pointless in their eyes, a shadow unseen and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was that of my son, and the thought of losing even that small recognition became unbearable as I returned home. I initiated the cooking process immediately, attempting to push away the gloom that had settled in. I prepared mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, hoping to infuse some semblance of normalcy into our dinner. "Bring me the mayo," Alex abruptly commanded, breaking his long silence. "Sure, here you are," I replied, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not of gratitude or conversation, but a mere order. It proved to be the final straw, the breaking point of my patience and tolerance. The evening took a turn for the worse when Mrs. Whitmore demanded, "Clean the toilet." "What now?" I gasped. "Yes, now. She insisted, her voice dripping with venom. Unable to contain my frustration, I snapped back. "Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty, just like your heart," she hissed. Our argument escalated quickly, with Alex interjecting, demanding I apologize to his mother. However, I refused, standing my ground for the first time in years. The conflict reached its peak, and in that moment, a decision crystallized within me. I needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for my sake, but for my son's as well. Retreating to my room, my resolve hardened. I downloaded divorce papers, filled them out, and slammed them in front of Alex. His shock was palpable, but I felt nothing but a cold determination. "I'm filing these," I declared, my voice steady. Facing my husband's bewildered expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reclaim my life. The days following my declaration of divorce were a whirlwind of cold glares and biting remarks. However, amidst this storm, I found an unfamiliar sense of liberation. One evening, as I served dinner, Mrs. Whitmore looked at the meal with disdain. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better," she remarked. Biting my tongue, I focused on my son's smiling face, and Alex chimed in sarcastically, "Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke." I sensed the anger simmering within me, yet I maintained my composure. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son," I stated calmly. Mrs. Whitmore snorted dismissively, saying, "Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house." The tension at the table became palpable, with Alex's attempts to belittle me only intensifying. "So, Era, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life," Alex remarked. I looked him straight in the eye, asserting, "I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son." His smirk faded slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mrs. Whitmore quickly intervened, saying, "Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you." The conversation turned to finances, a topic they usually avoided. "You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble," I stated, more to myself than to them. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed, claiming, "We'll manage. We don't need your pity money." However, Alex's silence spoke volumes. He knew the truth. Without my income, they would be in dire straits. In the following days, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Mrs. Whitmore oscillated between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and hurling insults when I didn't comply. Alex, on the other hand, seemed lost, his arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of his financial dependence became undeniable. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that chilled me to the bone. "She can't leave us like this," Alex hissed. "We need her money." Mrs. Whitmore's reply was cold and calculated. "Don't worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable she won't dare to leave." Hearing their true intentions laid bare was a revelation. They didn't care about me or our son. It was all about control and money. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one, but it wouldn't be fought with words or petty arguments. I would get them where it hurt the most: their pride and their pockets. The next morning, I started putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp and renowned woman. "I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve," I told her. She nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We'll make sure of that. You've been the sole breadwinner, right? We'll use that." As the days passed, my resolve only grew stronger. I embarked on the task of documenting everything: the insults, the financial manipulation, even the smallest grievances. It was time to turn the tables, time for them to face the consequences of their actions. As I built my case, a sense of empowerment filled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The shadows of discontent were slowly lifting, and in their place, a new dawn was emerging. As the divorce proceedings began, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Yet with each passing day, my sense of fear diminished, replaced by a steely resolve. One evening, Mrs. Whitmore tried a different tactic. Alara dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family, her words dripped with insincerity. I met her gaze unwaveringly. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me, I responded. Alex, who had been quietly observing, scoffed. Oh, playing the victim now. You're not as innocent as you pretend to be. I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice calm. I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat. The conversation turned, as it often did, to finances. You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him? Alex challenged. I smiled, a small, confident curve of my lips. I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into a sneer. You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back. Their words no longer held power over me. I knew my worth, and I knew the truth. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. She laid out the strategy clearly. We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets. I nodded, feeling a sense of vindication. The law was on my side, and I was ready to fight back. At home, the tension reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to undermine me became more desperate. You think you're so smart, she spat one evening, but you're just a cold-hearted woman abandoning your family. I looked her straight in the eyes. No, I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself. I'm done, I declared. Alex jumped in, his voice laced with venom. You'll regret this. You can't survive without me. However, his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days went by, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was organizing my documents, my son came to me. Mom, are we going to be okay? His voice was small, uncertain. I pulled him into a hug, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life. Just you and me. His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. I was fighting not just for myself, but for my son's future. The day of the court hearing loomed closer, and with it, a sense of impending freedom. I was ready to face Alex and Mrs. Whitmore, ready to end their reign of control and emotional abuse. I was determined to reclaim my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it served. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day I had been anticipating with a mix of dread and determination. As I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in the courtroom, I felt a sense of surrealism. This was the moment where everything would change. The proceedings began with a cold formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a devoted husband and father struggling under the weight of false accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the part of the grieving mother-in-law wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. However, their performance was transparent, their lies brittle. When my turn came, I spoke clearly, my voice steady. I have been the sole provider for this family for years. My husband's employment and his mother's manipulation have been constant sources of strain. Alex interjected, his voice laced with false hurt. Alara, how can you say these things? I've always supported you. I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. Support is more than just words, Alex. It's about actions, and your actions have shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. The judge listened intently as I presented my evidence. Financial statements, recordings of their verbal abuse, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. The truth was undeniable, and as the evidence mounted, Alex's facade began to crumble. Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked, her mask of innocence slipping away. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Then came the revelation that sealed their fate. My lawyer presented photographs and documents proving Alex's infidelity and Mrs. Whitmore's illicit affair with a wealthy neighbor, Mr. Harwood. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the images were displayed, showing them in compromising positions. Their deception was laid bare for all to see. Alex's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into one of fury, her hands trembling. "You invaded our privacy," Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice shrill. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. "No, I exposed the truth, a truth that you both have been hiding for too long." The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Their credibility was shattered, their lies exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. As the hearing came to a close, the judge's verdict was clear. I was granted full custody of our son, and a fair division of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with little more than their shattered reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and emotional abuse were finally over. I had stood up to my oppressors and emerged victorious. The sweetest moment came when my son ran into my arms outside the courthouse, his face bright with relief and happiness. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with joy. "Yes, we did," I replied, holding him close. "We're free now. It's just the beginning for us." As we walked away hand in hand, I knew that this was not just a victory for me. It was a victory for every person who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or unworthy. It was a victory for truth and justice, the start of a new chapter filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The aftermath of the court ruling was immediate and tumultuous. Word of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing their reputations in our small community. They were no longer able to hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, societal judgment and consequences awaited them. I concentrated on rebuilding my life with my son, finding solace in the satisfaction that Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I received an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Harwood, the wife of Mr. Harwood, with tearful eyes. "Alara, I heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did." Her voice broke, and the pain etched on her face was evident. Inviting her in, I offered a cup of tea, and as we sat at the kitchen table, she poured out her heart. I trusted her as a neighbor, as a friend, and to think she was having an affair with my husband, she said. I listened, offering words of comfort. It was clear that Mrs. Whitmore's actions had caused more damage than she had ever anticipated. The next day, I encountered Alex in town. He was a mere shadow of the man he once was, his arrogance replaced by a look of defeat. "Alara, please, can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stopped, facing him. "What is there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unable to meet my eyes. "I am sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, on your strength." His apology, though late, was a testament to the shift in power. He had lost everything: his dignity, his home, his family. In that loss, he had finally recognized his own faults. However, it was Mrs. Whitmore who faced the harshest backlash. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only ruined her reputation, but had also led to legal troubles. Mrs. Harwood had filed for divorce and was pursuing a lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. I heard about Mrs. Whitmore's plight from neighbors, the whispers and rumors painting a picture of a woman undone by her actions. She had become an outcast, shunned by those she had once considered friends. One afternoon at the grocery store, our paths crossed, and for a moment, our eyes met. The look of resentment and defeat in her eyes was unmistakable. "You did this to me," she hissed under her breath as she passed by. I watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and vindication. "No, Sylvia, you did this to yourself," I whispered to myself. The tides of justice had turned, and the consequences of their actions were now inescapable. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were living the life they had crafted through years of deceit and manipulation, and as I watched them struggle with the aftermath, I knew that the best revenge was living well, free from their toxic influence. Turning my focus back to my son and our new life, I realized that this was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of liberation. It was about breaking free from the chains of abuse and control. As I looked to the future, I knew that the best was yet to come.
Finally, our new house was ready and I could hardly contain my excitement about starting this new chapter. But then, out of nowhere, my in-laws arrived. "We'll be moving in here," they declared. "Please ask your parents to vacate the premises." Stunned, I looked to my husband for support, but he just took a deep breath and said, "Do as they've asked. Please inform your parents gently." Without another word, my in-laws began unloading their belongings. As they eagerly explored their new home, I couldn't help but ask, "Do you even realize whose house this is?" "My name is Nina. I'm 35 and have been happily married to my husband Matt for 3 years. We don't have children yet, but our life together is full of love. Lately, I've been worried about my aging parents. Their mobility has been declining, and it's been on my mind. So, I proposed to Matt that we move in with them. He was completely on board, saying, 'Living with your parents is no problem. It'll allow us to take care of them, and you'll have peace of mind. It's a win-win situation.'" "Thank you, Matt," I said, overwhelmed with gratitude for having such a considerate husband. We began making plans to live together, but executing this idea right away proved challenging. My family home is quite far from the city, which complicates our work commute. Neither of us can drive, making it impractical to live there. Moving my parents to the city isn't feasible either. Our current rental is small, suitable for 2, but cramped for 4, and adding a child would only make it worse. It seemed like there were no easy solutions. Then it hit me, why don't we take a bold step and build a spacious new house? When I shared the idea with Matt, his face brightened. "That's a fantastic idea. A new spacious home would be perfect for all of us." With his enthusiasm, we began planning our new house. When I told my parents, they initially felt guilty about us building a home for them. However, after I explained our reasoning, they understood and were thrilled. Their happiness was a balm to my heart. Later, my husband and I went to a real estate agency to finalize the details. We explored locations close to hospitals for my parents' health and near train stations for easier commuting. We also carefully discussed the specifics of the house. Although I sought input from my parents, they seemed reluctant about moving in with us. Fortunately, my husband had many valuable suggestions, which made the planning process much smoother. Gradually, our vision for the dream home began to take shape, and the prospect was thrilling. After much discussion and research online, we finalized the plans for our new house and were ready to consult with builders. "We're nearly there with the preparations," I said. "Building a house has turned out to be more challenging than I expected." My husband commented, "Balancing this with work makes progress slow, doesn't it?" We invested a lot of time into our plans, but the results were immensely satisfying. The blueprint for the house, which we meticulously crafted, far exceeded our expectations. We consulted with various real estate agents and conducted thorough online research to reach this point. Now, all that's left is to eagerly await the completion of the house. It will take some time, but the excitement and anticipation are boundless. However, as the project progressed, my in-laws started reaching out more frequently. "Dear, we heard you're building a new house. Is that right?" "Yes, that's correct. We're aiming to finish it by the end of the year." "How wonderful. I'm so impressed with Matt's efforts. To keep us updated with all the details. We'll visit you soon." "Okay, sure," I replied. Surprised by my mother-in-law's enthusiasm, my husband and I decided to visit their house over the weekend. They welcomed us with warm smiles. Building a brand new home is such a joyous event. Just thinking about it is exciting, isn't it? My father-in-law said, almost as if he were reminiscing about his own experiences. "Yes, we're very excited. We're hoping the construction goes smoothly and finishes quickly so we can move into the new house as soon as possible." We all shared a laugh. It's definitely an exciting topic. By the way, would you like to see the blueprints? Following my mother-in-law's request, my husband pulled out his phone to show them the design he had photographed. "Oh, it's quite spacious," she observed. "And so many rooms." "Yes, well, we'll be living with my parents, so we needed the extra space," I explained. "Wait, you're all moving in together." Both of my in-laws looked at my husband in disbelief. "So, you two are going to live with Nina's parents?" "Yes," my husband replied. "Since my parents are getting older, we suggested living together, which led us to decide to build a new house." "Really? I see. Moving in together." Their tone shifted noticeably, hinting at their discomfort. To shift the focus, I attempted to change the subject. "How have you both been? How's your health?" "We're doing well. No major changes, just the usual routine." But tell us more about the new house. Which room will your parents be using? Well, we're currently planning for this room, my husband explained, pointing to the blueprint. He seemed unaware of the subtle shift in mood, but I could see that their expressions grew tense when they learned my parents would be moving in. It might feel as if my parents were receiving special treatment. I felt a twinge of guilt but hoped they would understand our decision given my parents' situation. However, it was clear they were struggling to accept it. The construction of our home was progressing smoothly, and each visit revealed how close it was to completion. As my husband often said, I was caught between the eagerness to move in quickly and the desire for everything to be perfect. My parents visited midway through the construction and were thrilled with the progress, which made me feel grateful to be able to provide this for them. However, I was concerned that my husband had been visiting his parents almost every weekend lately. Are you planning to visit your parents again this weekend? Yeah, I am, he replied. You've been visiting them quite frequently since the start of the year, I noted. I want to show my appreciation to them as well. That's why I've been making an effort to visit them on my days off. I understand. Matt, you're so considerate. Should I come along? I asked, concerned that his parents might feel disappointed. Perhaps they had hoped to live with us, and I thought visiting them might be a good gesture of goodwill. But my husband reassured me, it's all right, I can manage it on my own, and he left for his parents' home. I decided to honor his choice and promised to support him as needed. Time passed quickly, and our new house was finally ready. On moving day, we loaded the car with boxes and headed to our new home, brimming with excitement. When we arrived and saw the house, I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow, our new home." It marked the start of a new chapter. I began envisioning our life there, cooking while watching my husband and our future child playing in the yard or enjoying a family barbecue. These thoughts only fueled my excitement further. My parents, who were set to move in with us, called to let us know they'd be delayed due to traffic. They told us to go ahead and start settling in, but I said, "We'll wait for you," intending to share the same with my husband. To our surprise, my husband's parents showed up unexpectedly. I was stunned and stared at their car in disbelief. Why are they here? I wondered as they stepped out of the car, smiles wide, and walked towards us. Look at this magnificent house. It's impressive enough to show off to our friends, they said. Yes, it's the house that Matt and I carefully planned, I responded. Nina, you have excellent taste, my mother-in-law added. Well, I suppose I can give her credit for that, I said, thank you. To my surprise, they began unloading a considerable amount of luggage from their car. Startled, I quickly asked, Mother-in-law, father-in-law, why do you have so much stuff? What are you planning to do? Their reply was equally unexpected. What do you mean? We're moving our things into this house. What? You're planning to live here starting today? You'll need to ask your parents to leave, they said. What? Why are you doing this? I asked in disbelief. With a hint of frustration, my mother-in-law explained, as a new bride, it's customary to prioritize your husband's family. We should be the ones moving into the new house. Once you understand that, please let your parents know we're busy moving our things. Feeling overwhelmed, I turned to my husband for support. He took a deep breath and said, do as she says, just let your parents know gently. But this house was intended for me and my parents. I can't accept this decision, I protested. He responded with visible irritation. Didn't my mom just say that it's natural for a wife to prioritize her husband's family? We can address your parents' situation later. I was in disbelief. It was clear that my husband was either heavily influenced by his parents or had always shared their perspective, which was now more evident than ever. Come on, help with the moving, he said. With that, my in-laws began unloading their belongings, even though neither my parents nor I had entered the house yet. They proceeded without permission. Oh, how wonderful. The interior is just splendid, they exclaimed, eagerly exploring the house. I confronted them. Do you know whose house this is? What? They responded, momentarily taken aback. After a brief pause, they turned to face me. Whose house? Of course, it's Matt's house. Are you suggesting you have a claim to it? Since you and Matt are living here and he's put so much into building this house, you have no right to make any claims without letting me explain first. My in-laws seemed to have jumped to conclusions and were blaming me. It appeared my husband hadn't shared details about our finances with them. Why would your parents live in Matt's house in the first place? They questioned. Yes, it's strange. Poor Matt, having such a demanding wife and parents, they added. I was at my breaking point. Why was I being criticized for their misunderstandings? If you intend to live here, then Matt should compensate for the amount spent, I said. I've contributed to this house, I said. My in-laws stared at me in disbelief. How much are you claiming to have paid? It must be a small amount, maybe $800, they mocked. My husband, looking uncomfortable, said nothing. I turned to him, challenging, Are you being honest? How high and mighty do you think you are? He hesitated. What are you insinuating? My mother-in-law demanded, her tone authoritative. Seeing that my husband was unwilling to address the issue, I decided to clarify things myself. I pay for this house entirely with my savings. If you plan to live here, I expect repayment of $355,000 for the cost of the house. My in-laws were stunned, their mouths agape and eyes wide. They turned to my husband for confirmation. Matt, is this true? Did Nina really buy this house? They asked. My husband nodded slightly. Yes, Nina bought the house. She got a promotion quickly and now earns more than I do. But you've been working for a long time as well. And you graduated from a prestigious university. Shouldn't you be earning a decent salary too? Well, I made a significant mistake at work. I can't get promoted and even had a pay cut. Now I'm earning as much as a new employee, my husband admitted. When he revealed this, my in-laws were at a loss for words. We never imagined Matt would be in such a situation. After a moment of silence, their attitude shifted entirely. They began apologizing to me. Nina, we're truly sorry for our earlier comments. We misunderstood everything. Please forgive us and let us stay in this house. What? They continued to apologize profusely, and my husband bowed deeply. Please, it's my fault for not telling you sooner. Let us stay here with you. I was completely taken aback by their words and actions. No matter how much you plead, I can't accept this. I built this house to live with my parents. If that's not possible, there's no point in having this house. If you want to live here, you'll need to pay me $355,000. We don't have that kind of money, they replied. Then it seems you'll need to find somewhere else to go. Wait, we sold our previous home and moved out. If we're evicted from here, we have nowhere else to go. Nina, please let us stay. Your parents can live with us too. What are they thinking? Living under one roof with a couple and both sets of parents is unmanageable. I can't agree to that. If you sold your house, you must have some funds left. Why not use that to find a flat? Hearing this, tears welled up in my in-laws' eyes. The truth is, we lost a significant amount in a bad investment. The money from selling our house and our retirement savings went toward paying off that debt. We have nothing left. I'm retired, and my wife has been a housewife for years, so she can't work at this age. You're our only hope. Despite the heartfelt plea, the situation was a result of their own financial mistakes. If you need help, shouldn't you be asking your son for support? I'm not in a position to support strangers, I replied. Why not? Aren't we family too? They asked. That's too much to ask. Can't you at least help us a little? They pleaded. It's impossible. I can't even fathom living with someone whose family is trying to take over our home. Matt, let's get a divorce. What? Wait a minute. I can't even think about a divorce. I'm sorry, but I can't forgive this. Please leave right now. When I mentioned divorce, my husband panicked. My in-laws continued to plead, but I had already lost any willingness to forgive them. If you plan to stay here, I'll call the police, I warned, causing my in-laws to flee in fear. My husband, dismayed, protested, I'm still your husband. I should have the right to stay here. If you insist, I'll take legal action, I replied. His demeanor changed instantly. Understanding that a lawsuit could cost him his job, he quickly gathered his belongings and left. Shortly after he departed, my parents arrived. They were confused by his absence but were shocked when I explained the situation. They thanked me, saying, "Thank you for standing up for us. I wish my husband had been more understanding, but I'm relieved to have distanced myself from such a selfish in-law family before our child was born." The divorce process proceeded smoothly, and I became single again. Now, I enjoyed peaceful days in our newly built house with my parents.
Hello, I'm Ingrid, and I'm 27 years old. I was orphaned at a very young age because both my parents passed away in a car crash. They didn't have any family to look after me, so I was put into an orphanage. I was there for about 3 years before my parents adopted me. My adoptive parents turned out to be these billionaires, so I had a pretty rich and fulfilling life after that. They didn't want to make my adoption a big deal, so they kept it hushed up. They wanted to do good without it having been broadcast everywhere. When I turned into an adult and had my own place, the two of them decided that they wanted to expand their business further and took to touring Europe in search of opportunities. It was around this time that I met Patrick, my now ex-husband. We met in college and instantly liked each other. After a couple of conversations, Patrick, a very happy-go-lucky, caring man, made me like him a whole lot more. Our dates led to us becoming an official couple. We had the perfect relationship, although there was one problem. It was no secret that Patrick's family did not like me. The first time I met them, Patrick and I had just graduated college. He waited to introduce me to his parents until we were both well settled in our lives. By that, I mean that we were both working good jobs. Patrick had warned me that his parents tended to be a little judgmental when it came to their children's significant others, and he wanted me to make the best impression I could. I didn't mind, but meeting the parents was nerve-wracking for me. By the time Patrick introduced me to his parents, we had been dating for a good 4 years. In those 4 years, we also got engaged, so I guess that, in itself, it was going to be a problem for his parents, considering they never even got to know me as his girlfriend. I remember freaking out about it with Patrick the day before we were supposed to meet his parents. They're going to hate me, Patrick. They won't, I promise you. Do you not think that they'll be shocked to find out that we're engaged? Well, yeah, but I don't think it will be that big of a deal. Are you being serious right now? You were scared about introducing me to them because you know how judgy they are, and you think introducing me as your fiancé is not going to make them judge me even more. Look, even if they do, will what they say really matter? It won't to me, but I don't know about you. You always seem so careful about them. I promise you that it won't affect or matter to me at all, Ingrid. All right, if you say so. But do you think maybe we should just not tell them we're engaged, and then, like a month or so later, we should tell them? Will that make you feel any better about this whole thing? Because I have no problem with either of the options. I think we should hide it just in case. I'll do anything to get on that good side. You have nothing to worry about. I'll be there with you no matter what. Thanks, sweetie. The only reason I had been freaking out so much was that whenever I suggested that Patrick tell his parents about me, he would make a whole fuss about them not going to approve of me. Now, at this point, I began to kind of understand why. You see, Patrick's family were pretty rich, and they loved to live lavishly. They wanted that for their children as well, and the only way they accepted their children dating was if they also mingled with people who were as rich or even richer than them. The way I was living back then was by no means rich according to their standards. I hadn't told Patrick about my family because I didn't see the point of it. Plus, by the time I figured out why he was so adamant about not letting me introduce myself to his parents, I felt like it was even more unnecessary for them to know just who my father was. I wanted them to like me for me and not for my money. I naively believed that they would like me that way, but oh boy was I wrong. We decided to meet Patrick's parents at a fine dining restaurant. At that time, Patrick held my hand as we walked in. I wore my engagement ring on my necklace because I wanted to keep it on me without actually drawing any attention to it. When we got to our table, his parents already looked upset. Patrick told me to expect that because they were big sticklers about time. When we had arrived exactly 2 minutes late, well, we were already off to a bad start. His parents gave me a once-over and twisted their faces into disgust. They proceeded to ignore me for a little while as they made conversation with Patrick. I will admit I felt really small in their eyes. The longer they ignored my presence, the stronger my urge grew to leave. I kept my head down for the most part until finally, Patrick drew his parents' attention towards me. Mom, Dad, you can't just keep talking to me here. This is my wonderful girlfriend, Ingrid. Oh, hello. It's a pleasure to meet both of you. Hi, I wish I could say the same. Mom, what? I'm only speaking the truth. So, Ingrid, I heard you and Patrick met in college. Is that right? Yes, we did. We happened to share some classes together. Ah, and how did you manage to attend this college? From what I know, the tuition is pretty high, and it's a pretty hard place to get into. Dad, that is enough, Patrick. You will not speak to your father that way. He's asking a very valid question, Ingrid. Please answer him. Well, I got a full ride there. I'm super grateful I got to go there because not only did I get to learn a lot of things, but I also got to meet Patrick, which has been one of the best things that has happened to me. Of course, it's one of the best things that's happened to you. He's loaded, and you need that kind of money. At least you have some brains because your looks aren't all that good. You know what? That's enough. We're leaving. Come on, Ingrid. Patrick grabbed my hand, and we walked out. I was in shock at the way that his parents had treated me. I couldn't believe that people could be so mean so openly and to the person's face. I was in too much shock to even feel anything. The car ride back home was silent because Patrick was fuming. When we reached home, Patrick made it a point to make sure that I was doing okay. But truthfully, at the moment, I really did not know how to feel. I had dressed up nicely and made sure that I sat properly as well. I didn't order anything expensive, but somehow, without me even saying a word, Paula and Marley made their judgment about me. Patrick didn't speak to his parents for a while after that. They texted him and told him that we had been very disrespectful by walking out on them during lunch. Patrick didn't respond to that and only texted them about a month later to tell them that he had gotten engaged. His parents weren't too happy about it, but Patrick threatened them with no contact if they said or did anything against me. They offered to pay for our wedding on the condition that they got to make all the decisions regarding it. Obviously, neither Patrick nor I wanted that, so we decided to do the next best thing, elope. My parents were in Europe, and they knew about me eloping. They were just happy that I was happy. And they did send Patrick and me a gift. Patrick did raise his brows at how they sent us a pretty expensive painting as a gift. But I just brushed it off as them having enough money to spend it on that. After getting married, we next met Paula and Marley at a party that they had hosted. They invited us to celebrate their anniversary. Truth be told, I was actually pretty happy that they had invited me despite the dislike they held for me. When we got there, I was ignored by everyone. If you think being ignored by 2 people was embarrassing, being ignored by about 30 people was even worse. I hung by Patrick's side for the most part, but nobody even tried to talk to me. If I ever did try to speak and make conversation, people would just either look me up and down and walk away, or they would continue talking to Patrick as if I never said anything. By the end of the night, I was in tears. I was humiliated and downright disgusted by the behavior that everyone was showing. The crowd had asked Paula and Marley to make a speech at the end of the night, and they got up to make one. By this time, I was tired and I wanted to go home, but in their speech, they began by talking about how grateful they were to have almost everyone in the room in their lives. That was only the first jab that they threw at me. They kept making many more, which the guests kept laughing at. At some point, I just got up and walked out. I ordered an Uber and went back home. I cried the entire way back home and up until Patrick got back home. When he got back, he seemed upset and angry. Why did you walk out like that? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? What? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me right now, Ingrid. I had to endure my parents yelling at me and a lot of the guests pitying me for being with you. Are you serious? What about how embarrassing it was for me? Oh, come on, Ingrid. You could deal with it for one night. It was my parents' anniversary, for God's sake. I was ignored by everyone, and your parents chose to make even more fun of me in their toast. How do you possibly expect me to be okay with something like that? I'm not saying what they did was right, but you could have just lived through it. I would have spoken to them about it after. What would that have done for me? I don't like being put in positions where I'm only being humiliated. Everyone was laughing at me. You've never been in that position before, so it's easy for you to talk about this like it's no big deal. My parents expect an apology from you. I want one too. I'm afraid that I won't be doing that. I'll only do that if they give me one too. As for your apology, I see no reason for apologizing to you. You always stood up for me. I don't see why this is any different. This is very different because, unlike before, you humiliated my family in front of all our guests, and your parents humiliated me, your wife, in front of all their guests. Maybe my parents were right about you. You're impossible. With that, Patrick went to sleep in the guest bedroom. I couldn't understand why he had a sudden change of behavior. Was it really that bad for him after I walked out? He was always the first person to stand up for me, especially considering the fact that I was usually bored with whatever his parents had to say about me. For me to walk out should have been the biggest signifier of just how bad they made me feel. Yet Patrick didn't seem to care about that. Patrick didn't talk to me for the next week. I also got a lot of texts from his parents, calling me ungrateful and an embarrassment. I tried to talk to Patrick, but he refused to. Eventually, I decided to give in and apologize to both him and his parents. Even that felt humiliating, but I was willing to go through it because I loved Patrick, and I didn't want this to be the hill I died on. Things after that only got worse for me. Patrick's parents retired and spent a lot of their time hosting family dinners. They hosted it once a week, and Patrick was always invited. The first time they hosted it, Patrick brought me along with him to their house. As soon as I stepped in, the atmosphere in the room got awkward. Paula was busy getting ready, so she didn't see me immediately, but Marley and the rest of Patrick's siblings awkwardly glanced at me. They didn't talk to me, and Patrick left me to stand by myself while he caught up with the rest of his family. When Paula came downstairs, she saw me and practically flew over to me in rage. "What are you doing here? Excuse me? No, I will not excuse you. What are you doing in my house right now?" "Well, you invited us for dinner." "Wrong. I invited Patrick because it's a family dinner. I'm Patrick's wife, so I'm a part of this family, am I not?" "Absolutely not. An orphan like you deserves no space in this family." "What? You thought you could hide the detail from us. We do background checks on our children's spouses, and you are not in my son's league whatsoever. I will never accept you here." "Why not? That can't be the only thing that determines whether I get to be a part of your family. You're ugly and poor. You'd never fit into our elite circles. I never want to see you again." "Why are you being so superficial? Are you scared that I'll damage your reputation just by existing? Does the fact that I bring your son happiness not satisfy you? If happiness brought in money, a lot of people would be billionaires. This is exactly why you'd never fit in with us. Or maybe I'll just never be as superficial as the rest of you because I value who a person actually is. You never even took the chance to get to know me before casting your judgments on me." "I'm glad I don't fit in with you, Ingrid. That's enough. Here's some money. Get yourself an Uber and leave." I stared at Patrick in shock as he held out the money. He shoved the money in my hands and turned back around towards his mother. She smirked at me. I felt tears spring into my eyes as I turned back around and walked out. I was once again crying in the Uber. I didn't understand why Patrick had changed so drastically. Was this his way of making up to his parents after the party? Whatever it was, I was hurt and angry at him. He was okay with his parents using my past as an insult and defending them instead of me, like he usually did. I wanted to yell and scream, but I knew that would only project a worse image of me and prove them right, which is why I walked away. I tried to think if anything I said was out of line, but I really did not see anything wrong. I was merely standing up for myself, calmly might I add. After Patrick came back home, he went back to not talking to me. My heart was breaking, and I felt so alone. I knew that he expected another apology, but I couldn't bring myself to do it like the last time. Paula had blatantly insulted me in the worst way, and Patrick was angry at me for it. If anything, I expected an apology from him. For the next 2 weeks, Patrick and I didn't speak to each other. It was hard at first, but I got used to it. Eventually, The dinners his family hosted still happened, and about once a week, I was all alone at home, which I truthfully did not mind. On one of those nights, my parents video called me. "Hey, honey. Hey, sweetie. How's it going? Hey, Dad. Hey, Mom. Things are not good. Why? What's wrong, sweetie? If you need help with anything, feel free to ask us. I don't think this is something you guys would be able to help me out with, but thanks for the offer. Where's Patrick? Is he not helping? That's the thing. He's part of the problem." Huh? Sweetie, could you be a little more clear about what the problem is? Well, his parents are pretty wealthy and also very snobby. Oh, I hate those kinds of people. Tell me about it. Anyways, they thought that I was some poor girl who could never live up to their standards and fit into their elite circles. So they took it upon themselves to humiliate me every time that I met them. What the hell? Oh yeah, and the last time I went over, Patrick's mom decided calling me an orphan was a good insult. Oh, that woman. I'm going to claw her face off. How dare she call my precious child an orphan? Do they not know about us? And what the hell has Patrick been doing in all this? I didn't tell them about you guys because I knew that their opinion of me would change if they knew. And I wanted them to like me for who I was and not for my wealth. As for Patrick, he's siding with them. He thinks that I was disrespectful when I stood up for myself. Honey, are you sure this is the man you want to be with? I love him a lot, but this is not how I want it to be. We haven't been speaking to each other for the last 2 weeks, and I'm surprisingly okay with that. All right, sweetie. I'll get you in touch with one of my friends over there. As for your worry about us not being able to help you out, I think we might actually be able to help you get a little sweet revenge. Huh? What do you mean? Your dad and I are coming there next week. We wanted to take you and Patrick on a vacation, but now we can just take you. More things for us to do together, I guess. Really? Oh my God, I'm so excited to finally get to see the two of you in person. Again, that was a real pick-me-up. Finally, I felt happy after so long. The three of us continued to talk for a little while after that. Dad elaborated on his plan to help me. After a little while, he asked me where these dinners of theirs were being held. And as far as I knew, they took turns hosting in their house and at restaurants. Conveniently, the week that my parents were coming, the dinner was going to happen in a restaurant. I needed to get information on where exactly this dinner was going to be held, so I could provide my parents with the location. Thankfully, I had Patrick's email logged into my phone. And if there was one thing I knew about Paula and Marley, it was that they loved to email everyone everything. It wasn't that hard to get the location, and I gave it to my parents. At the same time, my mom's lawyer friend contacted me, and we got started on the process of filing for divorce. My parents landed in the States and decided to check into their hotel, where I met them. We had lunch together, and then the two of them sent me on my way for a spa day that they entirely paid for because they thought I deserved it while they got ready to get revenge on my in-laws. My parents walked into the restaurant that Patrick and his family were at. According to Dad, when they approached the table, Marley and Paula began to murmur among themselves as they recognized just who he was. Mom told me that this was how the conversation went. "Hello? Oh my gosh, Mr. Burns. What brings you here? Oh wow, I just happened to see some familiar faces, and I figured that I could drop in and probably dine with you." Familiar faces? Who are you speaking about, Mr. Burns? Well, I see Patrick. Me? Well, hello. A pleasure to meet you. You, my daughter, has spoken a lot about you. But speaking of my daughter, where is she? Your daughter? I'm afraid you're mistaken. I don't think she's here, but she should be, right? I'm sorry, Mr. Burns, but we didn't even know that you had a daughter. Of course I do. And she's married to Patrick. What? I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken. Yes, his wife's name is Ingrid, and she was an orphan. Yes, I do know that, and that is why we adopted her. Excuse me? You're her dad? Yes, and from what I see, she isn't here. She's been telling me that there has been some problems with her in-laws, but I see what the problem was. It was you. No, she was the one who hid this huge thing from us. If we knew, you would have treated her better. She didn't want you to treat her nicely because of her background. Oh well, she did ask me to hand this over to Patrick. My dad handed Patrick the divorce papers and walked out. After that, it only took a couple of phone calls for a lot of investors to pull away from Marley's business. They were quickly crashing, and nothing was more satisfying than watching them crumble down to the levels that they made fun of. I got a lot of texts from all Patrick's family, calling me a bunch of nasty names while some of them begged me to talk to my dad and reverse what he had done. Patrick thankfully signed the divorce papers without any hassle. My parents and I went on a long vacation after that. I had the time of my life, and I slowly began to heal. Yeah, it hurt that I had lost the love of my life, but I also learned just how important it is to stand up for myself. I'm forever grateful to my parents for everything they've done for me, and I can't wait to see what else life has to offer me.
The shattered remains of my favorite mug lay scattered across the kitchen floor, a fitting metaphor for my life at that moment. I stood there, frozen, staring at the mess as my mind raced to process the information I'd just uncovered. Clara? What was that noise? Nate's voice called from the living room, snapping me out of my trance. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Nothing, I managed to croak out. Just dropped a mug. Footsteps approached, and Nate appeared in the doorway. His brow furrowed with concern as he took in the scene. Are you okay? You look pale. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Instead, I focused on the shards of ceramic at my feet. I'm fine, I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. Nate stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away instinctively, and confusion flashed across his face. Clara, what's wrong? The dam inside me broke. How long? I demanded, finally meeting his gaze. How long what? He asked, but I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. I thrust my phone at him, the incriminating email still displayed on the screen. How long have you been sleeping with her? Nate's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, fumbling for words. Clara, I can explain. Explain? I laughed bitterly. Explain how you've been cheating on me with some woman named Melissa, how you've been lying to me for God knows how long. It's not what you think, Nate pleaded, reaching for me again. I stepped back, my heel crunching on a piece of broken mug. Don't touch me, I hissed. Just don't. The front door opened, and I heard Ava's cheerful voice. Mom, Dad, I'm home. Panic seized me. I couldn't let our daughter see us like this. We'll discuss this later, I whispered fiercely to Nate. Act normal. Nate nodded, his face a mask of guilt and fear. We both plastered on fake smiles as Ava bounded into the kitchen. Hi, sweetie, I said, my voice unnaturally high. How was school? Ava's eyes widened as she noticed the broken mug. What happened? Oh, just a little accident, I said, forcing a laugh. Nothing to worry about. Why don't you go start your homework? I'll be there to help in a minute. As soon as Ava was out of earshot, I turned back to Nate. We're not done, I warned him. Not by a long shot. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I helped Ava with her homework, made dinner, and tucked her into bed, all while my insides churned with rage and betrayal. Finally, with Ava asleep, I confronted Nate in our bedroom. Start talking, I demanded. Nate sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was a mistake, Clara, a stupid, terrible mistake. How long? I repeated my earlier question. He hesitated. 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. I don't know, Nate said, his eyes pleading. Things between us have been different lately. I felt disconnected, and Melissa was just there. I laughed humorlessly. Oh, so it's my fault because I've been busy with work and taking care of our daughter? No, that's not what I meant, Nate backpedaled. I'm not blaming you. It was all me. I made a terrible choice, and I'm so sorry. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. Sorry isn't good enough, Nate. You've broken us. How am I supposed to trust you ever again? As I stood there, staring at the man I thought I knew, I realized our life together would never be the same. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I stared at Nate across the kitchen table, my fingers wrapped tightly around my coffee mug. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words and lingering resentment. I've been thinking, Nate said, breaking the tension. Maybe we need a change of scenery. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. I think we should move in with my parents for a while. The suggestion hit me like a bucket of ice water. Your parents? Nate, are you serious? Just hear me out, he pleaded. It could be good for us. A fresh start, away from everything. I laughed bitterly. You mean away from your mistakes? Nate flinched but pressed on. Mom and Dad have that big house. We'd have our own space and they could help with Ava. It would give us time to focus on us, on rebuilding our marriage. The word marriage made my stomach churn. Was there even anything left to rebuild? Clara, Nate said softly, reaching for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. I know I messed up, but I want to make this work. For us, for Ava, please just consider it. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of our vows pressing down on me. For better or for worse, right? Fine, I said finally. I'll think about it. The next few days were a whirlwind of discussions and preparations. Despite my reservations, I found myself agreeing to Nate's plan. Maybe a change would do us good. Maybe his parents' presence would keep him on the straight and narrow. The day of the move arrived all too quickly. As we pulled up to Evelyn and Alfred's sprawling suburban home, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Evelyn burst out of the front door, arms wide open. "Oh, my darlings," she cried, enveloping Nate in a hug before turning to Ava. "And there's my precious granddaughter." I hung back, watching the scene unfold. Alfred appeared in the doorway, nodding a greeting. "Clara," he said, his tone cordial but cool. "Alfred," I replied, forcing a smile. As we settled into our new living arrangement, I tried to remain optimistic. Evelyn and Alfred were polite, if a bit distant. Nate seemed more relaxed, more attentive. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to appear in the facade. It started small. Evelyn forgetting to include me in meal planning, Alfred making offhand comments about my work hours, the way they'd fall silent when I entered a room, exchanging meaningful glances. One evening, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "I just don't understand what he sees in her." Evelyn's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Nate could do so much better." Now, Alfred replied. "She's the mother of our grandchild. We have to tolerate her for Ava's sake." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. Tolerate me? Is that what they thought? "Clara?" Nate's voice startled me. "What are you doing?" I turned to face him, anger and hurt warring inside me. "Your parents," I hissed. "They hate me." Nate's brow furrowed. "What? No, they don't. You're imagining things." "Imagining things?" I repeated incredulously. "I just heard them talking about me. They said they have to tolerate me." "I'm sure you misunderstood," Nate said, his tone placating. "Mom and Dad love you." I stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. "Are you seriously taking their side?" "I'm not taking sides," Nate protested. "I just think you're overreacting." The word overreacting was the final straw. "You know what?" I snapped. "I'm done. This was a mistake. All of it." I stormed past him, heading for our room. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, I could hear Nate following me, pleading. "Clara, please, don't do this. We can work it out." I whirled to face him, tears stinging my eyes. "Work what out, Nate? Your affair, your parents' disdain, your inability to stand up for me? Tell me, what exactly are we working out?" As I stood there, suitcase in hand, I realized I was at a crossroads. Stay and fight for a marriage that felt more like a prison, or leave and face an uncertain future. The choice I made would change everything. I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of hushed voices downstairs. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed back in. I was in Nate's childhood bedroom, surrounded by his old trophies and faded posters, trying to salvage a marriage that felt like it was held together by fraying threads. Sighing, I dragged myself out of bed and made my way downstairs. The voices grew clearer as I approached the kitchen. "Just don't think she's trying hard enough," Evelyn was saying. "Nate deserves better." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. Nate's response was too low for me to hear, but Evelyn's dismissive snort came through loud and clear. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The conversation stopped abruptly, 3 pairs of eyes turning to me. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile. "Clara, dear," Evelyn chirped, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just talking about you." "I heard," I replied coolly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Nate cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mom was just saying how she thinks we should all go out for dinner tonight, as a family." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what brought this on?" Alfred spoke up, his tone gruff. "We thought it might be good for you all to get out of the house. You've been cooped up here for weeks." I bit back a retort about whose idea it was for us to move in the first place. Instead, I nodded. "Sure, dinner sounds nice." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and forced politeness. By the time we arrived at the restaurant, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. As we settled into our seats, Evelyn leaned across the table. "Clara, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering for you. I know how indecisive you can be." I blinked, taken aback. "Actually, Evelyn, Oh, it's no trouble at all," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm sure you'll love it." I looked to Nate for support, but he was engrossed in the wine list. Ava, sensing the tension, squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. The meal progressed, each moment more excruciating than the last. Evelyn dominated the conversation, barely allowing me to get a word in edgewise. Alfred made thinly veiled comments about my parenting skills, while Nate sat in silence, avoiding eye contact. Finally, as dessert arrived, I'd had enough. "Excuse me," I said, standing abruptly. "I need some air." I rushed out of the restaurant, gulping in the cool night air. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Clara?" Nate's voice came from behind me. "Are you okay?" I whirled to face him. "Am I okay? Are you seriously asking me that?" He looked bewildered. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" I repeated incredulously. "Your parents have been insulting me all night, and you've just sat there and let it happen." Nate's face hardened. "They're trying their best, Clara. You're not exactly making it easy." I stared at him, disbelief turning to anger. "So this is my fault now?" "I didn't say that," he backpedaled, "but you could try harder to get along with them." "Try harder?" I hissed. "I've been trying so hard I'm about to break, Nate, and you don't even see it." His expression softened. "Clara, please, let's not do this here." But I was beyond caring about making a scene. "No, Nate, we're doing this now. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's so clearly not." "What are you saying?" he asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. I took a deep breath, the words I'd been holding back for weeks finally spilling out. "I'm saying that this isn't working. Moving in with your parents, trying to fix our marriage, it's all been a huge mistake." Nate's face crumpled. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I think it's time we face the truth. Our marriage is over, Nate." As the words hung in the air between us, I realized there was no going back. The life I'd known, the future I'd planned, was crumbling around me. But amid the fear and uncertainty, I felt something else stirring, a spark of hope, a glimmer of freedom. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't live like this anymore. The days following our disastrous dinner outing blurred together in a haze of tension and unspoken words. Nate and I barely spoke, tiptoeing around each other like strangers. Evelyn and Alfred's hostility, once veiled, now simmered just beneath the surface. One morning I woke to find Ava's bed empty. Panic gripped me as I rushed downstairs, only to find her giggling in the kitchen with Evelyn. "There you are, sleepyhead," Evelyn cooed, her saccharine tones setting my teeth on edge. "I was just teaching Ava how to make proper pancakes. Lord knows she needs someone to show her these things." I bit back a retort, forcing a smile for Ava's sake. "That's nice, sweetie. Why don't you go get dressed for school?" As Ava scampered off, Evelyn's demeanor changed instantly. "You know, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "it wouldn't kill you to take more interest in domestic matters. A woman should know how to keep a proper home." I felt my temper flare. "I manage just fine, Evelyn. My career doesn't make me any less of a mother or wife." She scoffed. "Does it? Because from where I'm standing, your family is falling apart." Her words hit like a physical blow. Before I could respond, Nate walked in. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing between us. "Just fine, dear," Evelyn chirped, all sweetness again. "Clara and I were just having a little chat about family values." Nate nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Right. Well, I'm heading to work. Clara, don't forget we have that dinner with my boss tonight." I froze. "That's tonight?" "Nate, I can't. I have a deadline." "You can't cancel," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "This is important for my career." As he left, Evelyn's smug smile made my blood boil. See? A good wife would remember these things. That evening, I found myself at an upscale restaurant, seated across from Nate's boss and his wife. The conversation flowed around me as I struggled to focus, my mind still on my unfinished article. "So, Clara," Nate's boss turned to me. "Nate tells me you're a journalist, too. How's that going with family life?" Before I could answer, Nate jumped in. "Oh, Clara's thinking of scaling back her work, aren't you, honey? To focus more on home life." I stared at him, dumbfounded. What? Nate's boss nodded approvingly. "Good for you. Family should always come first." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. As soon as we got home, I rounded on Nate. "What the hell was that about? Scaling back my work?" He sighed, loosening his tie. "Come on, Clara. You know how important this promotion is." I was just saying what he wanted to hear. "At my expense?" I hissed, mindful of Ava sleeping upstairs. "Don't be so dramatic," he scoffed. "It's not like your job is as demanding as mine anyway." I reeled back as if slapped. "Is that what you really think?" Before he could answer, Alfred appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right? We could hear you from upstairs." Nate plastered on a smile. "Just a little disagreement, Dad. Nothing to worry about." Alfred's gaze settled on me, cold and judgmental. "Clara, I think it's time you started considering what's best for this family. Your selfish behavior is tearing it apart." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. "Selfish? I've given everything to this family. I've put up with your constant criticism, your son's infidelity, all while trying to maintain my career and raise my daughter. And I'm the selfish one?" The room fell silent. Nate and Alfred stared at me, shocked. In that moment, I realized I'd reached a crossroads. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-respect, my career, my happiness for a family that didn't value me. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I can't do this anymore." As I turned to leave the room, I caught sight of Ava standing on the stairs, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. My heart broke, but I knew in that moment that I had to be strong, for both of us. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Things couldn't go on as they were. It was time for a change, no matter how terrifying that prospect might be. The morning after my outburst, I woke with a sense of dread weighing heavily on my chest. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way downstairs, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. I found Nate in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. I nodded, pouring myself a cup. "Yes, we do." "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Nate began. "I know things haven't been easy." "Easy?" I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Nate, things haven't been easy since the day I found out about your affair. Living here, with your parents constantly undermining me, has been a nightmare." Nate's face hardened. "They're just trying to help, Clara. Maybe if you made more of an effort." "Don't you dare put this on me," I hissed, my anger flaring. I've been trying so hard I'm exhausted, but it's never enough, is it? Not for you, not for them." Before Nate could respond, Evelyn swept into the kitchen. "Oh good, you're both up. Nate, dear, don't forget you promised to take your father golfing today." I stared at Nate incredulously. "Golfing? Now?" He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I forgot. Dad's been looking forward to it." "Of course he has," I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Is there a problem, Clara? Surely you can handle things here for one day without my son." Something inside me snapped. "You know what, Evelyn? There is a problem. The problem is that your son and I are trying to have an important conversation about our marriage, and you're more concerned about a golf game." Evelyn's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? Nate, are you going to let her talk to me this way?" I turned to Nate, waiting to see what he would do. His eyes darted between us, panic evident on his face. Mom, Clara, please, can't we all just calm down?" His weak attempt at peacemaking was the final straw. "No, Nate, we can't just calm down. This is our life, our marriage falling apart, and you're worried about keeping the peace?" I stormed out of the kitchen, my mind racing. As I reached the stairs, I heard Ava's small voice. "Mommy? Why is everyone yelling?" My heart clenched. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy are just having a disagreement." "Are we going to have to leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled back, looking into her worried eyes. In that moment, I knew I had to make a decision, not just for myself, but for Ava. I don't know, honey, I said honestly. But I promise, whatever happens, we'll be okay. As I held my daughter, I heard Nate and Evelyn's voices rising again downstairs. The constant tension, the arguments, the silent treatment, it was all taking a toll on Ava. I couldn't let this continue. With a deep breath, I made my decision. I gently pulled away from Ava. Sweetie, can you go to your room and pack a small bag? Just some clothes and your favorite toys. Her eyes widened. Are we going on a trip? I forced a smile. Something like that. Go on now, I'll be right there. As Ava scampered off, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I should have called weeks ago. Joan? It's Clara. I need your help. Can Ava and I stay with you for a while? My sister's voice was warm and concerned. Of course. What's going on? I took a shaky breath. I'm leaving Nate. I can't do this anymore. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief wash over me. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Joan's apartment felt like a sanctuary after the suffocating atmosphere at Nate's parents' house. As I sank into her plush couch, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift slightly from my shoulders. Okay, sis, Joan said, handing me a steaming mug of tea. Start from the beginning. I poured out everything. Nate's affair, the move to his parents' house, the constant belittling and criticism. Joan listened intently, her lawyer's mind no doubt cataloging every detail. Clara, she said when I finished, her voice gentle but firm. This is emotional abuse. What they've been doing to you, it's not okay. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. Abuse. I'd been so caught up in trying to make things work, I hadn't even realized. We need to document everything, Joan continued, switching into lawyer mode. Every insult, every manipulative comment, it'll be crucial if Nate tries to fight for custody of Ava. The mention of custody sent a chill down my spine. You really think he'd do that? Joan's expression hardened. After what you've told me about his parents, we need to be prepared for anything. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into gathering evidence. I wrote down every memory of Evelyn and Alfred's mistreatment, every instance of Nate's neglect. Joan helped me organize it all, building a case that left me stunned when I saw it laid out. But even as I worked, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Was I really ready to end my marriage, to tear apart Ava's family? My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. We need to talk. Come to the house tomorrow. I showed Joan the message, my stomach churning. I have to go, don't I? She nodded grimly. Yes, but not alone. I'm coming with you. The next day, we pulled up to Nate's parents' house. My palms were sweaty as I rang the doorbell. Nate answered, his eyes widening at the sight of Joan. What's she doing here? He demanded. Moral support, I said firmly, pushing past him into the house. Evelyn and Alfred were waiting in the living room, their faces masks of disapproval. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law, Evelyn sneered. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm here to talk about divorce proceedings, Nate, and custody arrangements for Ava. The room erupted into chaos. Nate started pleading, Evelyn shrieked about the sanctity of marriage, and Alfred thundered about ungrateful wives. Through it all, Joan stood beside me, a pillar of strength. Enough, I shouted, silencing the room. I've made my decision. I won't live like this anymore, and I won't let Ava grow up in this toxic environment. Nate's face contorted with anger. You can't take my daughter away from me. Watch me, I retorted, my voice ice cold. I have documented evidence of the emotional abuse I've endured in this house. Do you really want to take this to court? The color drained from Nate's face. Evelyn, however, wasn't backing down. You ungrateful little. She lunged forward, her hand raised as if to slap me. Joan stepped between us, her voice sharp as a knife. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs. Thompson. Assault charges wouldn't look good in a custody battle. Evelyn recoiled, sputtering with rage. I turned to Nate, my heart pounding. This is your last chance, Nate. Are you going to stand with your wife and daughter, or with them? The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could see the conflict in Nate's eyes, the war between the man I'd married and the son his parents had molded. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't leave my parents, Clara. They need me. In that moment, I felt something inside me shatter. The last lingering hope that we could salvage our marriage crumbled to dust. but along with the pain came a surge of determination. "Then we're done," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Expect to hear from my lawyer." As Joan and I walked out of the house, I felt like I was leaving more than just a failed marriage behind. I was leaving behind years of self-doubt, of compromise, of settling for less than I deserved. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. And more importantly, I had the strength to show Ava what it meant to stand up for oneself, to demand respect and love. As we drove away, I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. The day of the final confrontation arrived with a sense of foreboding. Joan and I had spent weeks preparing, but as we approached Nate's lawyer's office, my stomach churned with anxiety. "Remember," Joan whispered as we entered the building, "you hold all the cards, stay strong." Nate was already there, looking haggard and defeated. His eyes met mine briefly before darting away. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, eyed us coolly. "Let's get started, shall we?" she said, gesturing to the conference room. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but think of Ava, waiting at Joan's apartment with a babysitter. Everything I was about to do was for her. Nate's lawyer spoke first. "My client is willing to agree to joint custody with Ava primarily residing with him and his parents." I felt a surge of anger. "Absolutely not," I snapped. "I have evidence of the emotional abuse I suffered in that house. Ava will not be subjected to that environment." The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "Allegations of abuse are serious, Mrs. Thompson. Do you have proof?" Joan slid a thick folder across the table. "We have documented every instance of mistreatment, corroborated by witnesses and psychological evaluations." As Nate and his lawyer pored over the documents, I saw the color drain from his face. "Clara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I had no idea it was this bad." I laughed bitterly. "Of course you didn't. You were too busy trying to please your parents to notice what they were doing to your wife and daughter." Nate's lawyer cleared her throat. "In light of this evidence, we're prepared to discuss a more equitable arrangement." The next few hours were a blur of negotiations. Custody arrangements, division of assets, alimony. Every detail of our lives together was dissected and divided. Through it all, I held firm, buoyed by Joan's steady presence and the memory of everything I'd endured. Finally, we reached an agreement. Primary custody of Ava would be mine, with Nate granted visitation rights. Our assets would be split fairly, and I would retain our family home. As Nate picked up the pen to sign the divorce papers, he hesitated. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for everything. I should have protected you and Ava." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the love we once shared, but then I remembered the years of neglect, of choosing his parents over his family, and my resolve hardened. "It's too late for sorry, Nate," I said quietly. "Just sign the papers." With a shaky hand, Nate signed. As I added my own signature, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was done. I was free. As we left the office, Joan squeezed my hand. "You did it, sis. I'm so proud of you." But our victory was short-lived. As we stepped out of the building, we were confronted by a furious Evelyn and Alfred. "You conniving witch!" Evelyn shrieked. "How dare you turn our son against us?" Alfred loomed over me, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Clara. We'll make sure you never see Ava again." I felt a moment of panic, but then something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up anger and frustration came pouring out. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice ringing through the street. "You will not threaten me or my daughter ever again. Your reign of manipulation and abuse ends now." I turned to Nate, who had followed us out. "This is your last chance, Nate. Your parents or your daughter, choose." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could see the conflict in Nate's eyes, the war between the man I'd married and the son his parents had molded. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I choose Ava." Evelyn let out a wail of despair, while Alfred's face contorted with fury, but I barely noticed them. In that moment, looking at Nate's defeated form, I realized something profound. I didn't need his choice. I didn't need his approval or his parents' acceptance. I had everything I needed: my daughter, my freedom, and my self-respect. As Joan and I walked away, leaving the chaos behind, I felt a surge of triumph. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it head-on. The old Clara, the one who had bent and compromised and suffered in silence, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who would fight for herself and her daughter with every breath. This wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, full of possibility and hope, and I was ready for it. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when I walked away from Nate and his toxic family. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been mine, filled with hard-won victories, cherished moments with Ava, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Ava, now a spirited 13-year-old, called out, "I'll get it, Mom." A moment later, I heard her startled voice, "Dad?" My blood ran cold. I rushed to the door, wiping my hands on my apron. There stood Nate, a shadow of his former self. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. "Clara," he slurred, swaying slightly, "I need your help." I instinctively stepped in front of Ava, shielding her. "Nate, what are you doing here?" He stumbled forward, and I held up a hand to stop him. "Please," he begged. "I've lost everything. My job, my savings. Even Mom and Dad have cut me off. I didn't know where else to go." A part of me, the part that had once loved this man, ached to help him. But I remembered the years of neglect, the pain he'd put me through, and I steeled myself. "Ava, honey," I said calmly, "go to your room, please." Once Ava was out of earshot, I turned back to Nate. "You can't be here," I said firmly. "You're drunk and you're scaring our daughter." "Our daughter," he repeated bitterly, "the one you took from me." Anger flared within me. "I didn't take her from you, Nate. You chose to let her go when you refused to stand up to your parents." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm. "You ruined my life," he shouted. For a moment, fear gripped me. But then something shifted. I was no longer the woman who would cower or make excuses for him. I was stronger now. With a swift motion, I broke free of his grip and pushed him back. "No, Nate," I said, my voice steady and strong. "You ruined your own life, and I won't let you ruin mine or Ava's any longer." I saw a flicker of the old Nate in his eyes, shame, regret, and a hint of admiration. But it was too late for that now. "I'm calling you a cab," I said. "And then I'm calling my lawyer. This ends now, Nate. No more surprise visits, no more manipulations. If you want to see Ava, you'll do it through proper channels, and you'll do it sober." As I dialed the cab company, I felt a presence behind me. Ava stood there, her eyes wide but determined. "Is Dad okay?" she asked softly. I knelt down to her level, my heart swelling with love and pride for this brave, compassionate girl. "He's going through a tough time, sweetie, but that's not our responsibility anymore. We're going to be okay." As we watched the cab drive away with Nate, I felt a profound sense of closure. The last lingering threads of my old life had been severed, and the future stretched out before us, bright and full of possibility. Later that night, as Ava slept peacefully, I sat on our porch, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the struggles, the moments of doubt, they had all shaped me into the woman I was now. I thought of the women out there who might be where I was 5 years ago, trapped, afraid, doubting themselves. I wished I could tell them that there was hope, that they were stronger than they knew. As the stars twinkled above, I made a silent vow. I would use my voice, my experiences, to help others find their strength. My story wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving, about reclaiming one's power and dignity. Tomorrow, I decided I would start writing again. Not just articles, but a book. My story, raw and honest, a beacon of hope for others. The cool night breeze caressed my face, and I smiled. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautifully, wonderfully mine. And for the first time in years, I was excited about what the future held. As I headed back inside, I paused at Ava's room, watching her sleep. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. For her, for me, for the life we'd built together. This wasn't just an ending. It was a new chapter, brimming with hope, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that we were going to be more than okay. We were going to be extraordinary.
I'm Kiona. I'm 30 years old, and I stay at home taking care of the house. My husband, Aoki, is 6 years older than me, and we've been living with his parents for 2 years. Aoki's parents, Robert and Barbara, are both in their 60s, and they're healthy and full of energy. Barbara, Aoki's mom, really likes going out and having fun. Since I moved in, I've noticed she hardly ever does any chores around the house. Even though she doesn't work outside the home, she doesn't do much inside either. She used to be a stay-at-home mom, but now she leaves most of the housework to me. Sometimes she'll tell me to go have fun while she stays home, but then she'll complain if things aren't done when she comes back. I've been dealing with this situation, trying my best to not get too frustrated. Whenever I try to explain to my mother-in-law that I might not finish everything before she leaves, she brushes it off. She says it's normal to do a lot of chores and criticizes my generation for not being able to handle it, wishing I could be more like Aoki. It's not just the remarks that bother me. Barbara constantly praises Aoki, especially because he works for a big company, which she's really proud of. She often says things like, "Aoki works so hard, but his wife isn't doing well." It's like her favorite phrase, and Aoki doesn't defend me. During dinner, Barbara starts complaining about me, and Aoki just responds with a simple, "Oh really?" showing little interest. When I first met Aoki, I thought he was mature because he was older, but things have changed. It feels like he sees me only as a maid. Even when I'm working late into the night, he doesn't say anything to me. Instead, he tosses laundry at me, aiming for my face, and says, "Here, do this too." I regret marrying someone like him. Since we got married, he's changed a lot. On our first anniversary, he bought a cake, but then threw a pie in my face and laughed. You wouldn't think he's a grown man. But there's one bright spot in my life, and that's my father-in-law, Robert. He's really calm and always asks if I need help with anything. He's the only one who treats me kindly in this house. Since I quit my job when I got married, he's the only person I can really talk to. I've grown to love Robert like a real father. But Robert works during the day, so he's not home much. That means I'm often alone with Barbara. When I talk to Robert, Barbara doesn't say anything, but I can tell she doesn't like it, and her attitude towards me has gotten worse. She started accusing me of making eyes at my father-in-law just because Aoki ignores me. She'd say these things when Robert couldn't hear. I tried to defend myself, saying it wasn't true, but she just brushed it off. "Did I touch a nerve?" she'd say, acting like I was overreacting. No matter what I said, she always had a snarky comeback. Our talks never really connected. I talked to Aoki about it, hoping he'd understand it was just Barbara's imagination. But he just laughed it off. "So now you're into older men too," he joked. It was clear nothing would change. I didn't expect him to help with chores or stop Barbara's teasing, but I never thought he'd say something like that. It was a big shock. I started feeling like I didn't belong in that house. One summer day, Barbara mentioned planning a family trip for Aoki's summer break. At first, I thought it was just her usual desire to go out, but then she surprised me by asking if I wanted to come along. I didn't expect to be invited. I thought they would go without me. When I hesitated, Barbara seemed suspicious and asked if I didn't want to go. I felt uneasy about her sudden invitation. What did she want by including me? I was unsure, but I didn't know how she would react if I said no. That night, Aoki asked me again if I was going on the trip. I replied that I was invited. His response was unexpected. He burst out laughing for some reason. "What's so funny?" I asked, feeling uneasy. Aoki just brushed it off, saying it was nothing. On the day of the trip, we set off with Aoki driving. Robert couldn't join us right away due to work, so it was just the three of us in the car. Aoki driving, Barbara in the passenger seat, and me in the back. I couldn't see their faces clearly, which made me even more anxious. Barbara suddenly asked if I had withdrawn some money for the trip. I confirmed that I had taken out a few $100s. She seemed pleased at this, which struck me as odd. After driving for a while, I noticed we had passed the inn we were supposed to stay at. "Did we just pass the inn?" I asked. Aoki replied vaguely, saying there was a tourist spot ahead and we'd check in after seeing it. His smile seemed forced, and I sensed something strange was going on. As we drove away from the inn, the scenery outside turned greener. I let out a quiet sigh, making sure neither Barbara nor Aoki heard me. Eventually, we arrived at a dam. It wasn't very big, and there weren't many people around. Let's get out and stretch our legs, Barbara suggested eagerly. And make sure not to leave anything valuable in the car, Elke added. I followed their instructions, stepping out of the car. But I noticed Barbara and Elke hesitating, pretending to be busy inside the car. Once I stepped out and closed the door, I heard the car lock click. Elke had only left the windows slightly open. Then he burst into laughter. What's going on? Are we staying here for the night? I felt anger bubbling up towards Barbara, but I kept it in check. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my cool. You walked right into that one, didn't you? My husband was laughing so hard he was clutching his stomach. My wallet and cell phone were still in the car. Everything had gone according to Barbara and my husband's plan. Have fun out here, Kiona, Barbara sneered. Maybe you can eat some grass and sleep under the stars. My husband, holding my wallet and going through it, closed the window. His laughter died down, and then they drove off, leaving me alone. Well, they're a handful, and it's hot, I muttered to myself. Even though it was scorching hot and I was at risk of dehydration, I surprisingly didn't panic. An hour later. Why are you here? My husband was stunned to see me in the lobby of the inn where we were supposed to stay. Are you a ghost? Did something happen at the dam? He asked, looking bewildered. Barbara looked like she was about to pass out. I considered teasing them by pretending to be a ghost but decided against it. I'm not a ghost and I'm staying here tonight, I told them, showing them the key to my room. I had already left my luggage there. My husband couldn't grasp the situation and started to get agitated. He thought I had taken the key to their room without permission. What are you doing? Give it back, he demanded, trying to grab the key from me roughly. Just then, a man appeared and grabbed my husband's hand. Sir, please refrain from causing a disturbance here, the man said firmly. He was about the same age as Robert, but he had a strong build and was taller, making him seem more dependable than my middle-aged, slightly overweight husband. Who are you? Are you staff here? You can't just interfere with a guest like this. I'll sue you for assault. Barbara yelled at the man who had intervened. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. I am the owner of this inn, the man replied calmly. Hearing this, my husband quickly let go of my hand. I recognized the owner. Back when I was in college, I had visited this area with my friends during summer vacation. It was scorching hot that day, and we got lost on our way to our accommodation. Eventually, we stumbled upon a girl collapsed on the side of the road. That girl was Mary, the owner's daughter. We called an ambulance and stayed with her until help arrived. The next day, the owner visited us at the inn where we were staying and thanked us profusely. He said, "You saved my daughter's life. Thank you so much." He also offered, "We own this inn too, so next time you're in the area, please stay with us. You won't have to pay." Since then, my family and I have visited the inn several times, so I knew the owner well. As he reprimanded my husband and Barbara, he remained polite, but I could sense his underlying anger. In fact, both the owner and I were aware of Barbara and my husband's scheme from the beginning. I had caught wind of their plan 2 weeks ago. Feeling suspicious about their sudden invitation for a trip, I decided to set up a voice recorder in the living room. I targeted times when my husband and Barbara were alone, like when I was taking a bath or doing laundry, and their plan came to light. I know, let's ditch Kiana somewhere. It would be hilarious. How about here? There's a gym about an hour's drive from the inn. When I heard their conversation, I was shocked. I immediately called the inn and told the owner everything about the situation I was in and what they were planning. The owner was furious. He himself had once experienced his daughter collapsing in the heat, so he was even more upset. Knowing the situation beforehand, the owner arranged for my pickup today. After my husband and Barbara's car left, he had me ride in the inn show. By the way, the driver turned out to be Mary from that incident years ago. I got my license. Let's go for a drive, she said excitedly. Right now? I asked, surprised. Oh, that's great, I replied. We chatted happily, bought some local specialty ice cream on the way, and arrived at the inn. Even though I knew about the plan and that a pickup was coming, I was still worried for Mary. But she knew the area like the back of her hand. So we arrived at the inn several tens of minutes earlier than my husband and Barbara. You mentioned suing earlier, ma'am, the owner said, looking at Barbara sternly. Yes, I did. It's outrageous to be accused of the opposite, Barbara retorted. I'm sorry, but you're not our guests, the owner replied firmly. What? Don't mess with us. My husband and Barbara both lost their temper. Your and your mother's reservations have been canceled, the owner stated plainly. I added you. Who do you think you are? My husband was on the verge of losing his temper again, but the owner restrained him. Kiana did nothing wrong. We, the inn, canceled your reservations, the owner explained calmly. What do you mean? My husband demanded. If you leave a woman alone at a dam in the mountains after stealing her wallet, wouldn't you be committing a crime? We can't allow such people to stay at our inn. We also called the police. My husband and mother-in-law became even more furious at this revelation. This is no joke. Don't think you can get away with this. I work at our company, my husband protested. This little inn in the mountains. Just then, Robert arrived. Hey, what's going on here? Sensing the tension, Robert looked around and asked for an explanation. Barbara and my husband appealed to Robert, saying the inn staff were rude and they wanted to stay elsewhere. But when Robert heard what had happened, he was furious. You idiots. It was the first time I had seen Robert yell. How embarrassing. I can't believe we're from the same family. You two, get out of here now. My husband and mother-in-law were stunned by Robert's outburst. Where to? Another inn, they asked. But Robert was firm. Wait a minute, that's not possible, Dad, my husband said with a wry smile. But Robert was resolute. You're disowned. Get out. No, don't make me say it again. He pushed my husband away. Then the police arrived and my husband and Barbara turned pale. The owner and I explained the situation to the officer, and I played back the recorded conversation. My husband and Barbara started crying. But Robert intervened. Quiet down. You're disturbing the inn. Officer, please take them away. It's not like that, officer. We didn't think it would be such a big deal. It was just a prank. My husband tried to explain, but the officer's expression changed. A prank? Are you serious? Don't you realize that your little joke could have put someone's life at risk, especially your own wife's? They were scolded harshly. Though they weren't arrested due to it being a family matter, Barbara and my husband looked pale throughout the ordeal. This isn't over. Kirana's feelings will determine your future. Understand. With those final words, my husband and Barbara, still pale, went home. Robert seemed apologetic the entire time. He kept saying, I'm really sorry. I can't apologize enough for not noticing the unpleasant experiences you have been having, for the terrible ordeal you went through today. He also deeply apologized to the inn owner, expressing remorse for the trouble they caused. Interestingly, the inn owner is a businessman who runs several other companies and is also a client of the company where Robert works. Without knowing this, my husband had boasted, I work for a big company. I'm relieved I was able to hold my husband and Barbara accountable, but it's also frightening to think what could have happened if I hadn't known about their plan beforehand. I hope being scolded by the police makes them realize the seriousness of their actions. After returning from the inn, I decided to divorce my husband. Naturally, I demanded a significant alimony. I hope they learn from this experience and refrain from hurting anyone else in the future. It's quite a turn of events. Robert and Barbara ended up divorcing as well. Robert severed ties with my ex-husband and kicked him out of the house. Due to the incident, my ex-husband was advised to resign from his job. It turns out his workplace behavior had been problematic for a while. Just as he treated me poorly, he had been harsh to his colleagues and juniors, and the HR department was already considering taking action against him. Reflecting on my own actions, I'm disappointed that I mirrored such behavior. My ex-husband, now unemployed, is struggling to find another job. Despite his age, he lacks a solid track record for managerial positions from his previous company, and he struggles to explain why he left. Barbara was also kicked out by Robert and has sought refuge with relatives at her parents' home. However, there are concerns about her spending habits and love for travel. Her relatives fear she might drain their savings if she moves in with them. It might be wise for her to consider finding a part-time job, especially since she's still in good health. So I moved out of my in-laws' house and now live nearby by myself. I'm still friends with Robert, and sometimes I ask him for advice about work issues. Before this, I used to take care of the house and kids, but now I'm starting a new chapter in my life. When I was looking for a job, the owner of a company approached me and asked if I'd like to work for them. He was really concerned about how things were going for me. It seemed like he wanted to find a job for me in his company. I happily agreed to join. I felt really thankful for his kindness. I expressed my gratitude, but he insisted that they were the ones who should be grateful. It felt like I had already returned the favor from before, and now I needed to give something back. The company he recommended me to is well known and treats its employees well. It was a pleasant surprise. Interestingly, it's in the same industry that my ex-husband used to brag about, but this company is much bigger. Everyone there is friendly, and I'm enjoying my days much more now than when I was dealing with marital problems.
I will never forget what my father told me when I announced my engagement. He took me to the side and said, "Zoe, are you sure about marrying this man, Peter? I know you're in love with him, but I don't think he's a good match for you." "Why are you saying this, Dad? He loves me and respects me. I don't care if he's not as well off as us. I know that, Zoe. You know, I built my riches from nothing. I would never disrespect the person who does not belong to my economic class. But Peter is a very sketchy man, and his mother is no different." "What do you mean, Dad? I don't understand." "Call it a father's instinct, so. This man doesn't love you. Yes, he showers you with affection, but always talks about how rich you are. I heard him flexing to his friends that he bagged the rich brat." Julia just laughed with him and agreed. "You must be mistaken, Dad. Peter would never say those things about me. Julia also loves me a lot. I'm sure she would scold Peter if he tried to joke like that. Sometimes I wish I had listened to my father. He didn't know what he was talking about. I was a stupid girl in love. My mother passed away 2 years before I got married. My dad was sick and wasn't long for this world. I was desperate to hold on to something that would give me the will to live. Peter and Julia became those people. My dad was a rich man. He made a series of good investments that made him very financially well off. I worked hard at my job and got a moderate salary as well. All in all, we were pretty comfortable in life. My husband Peter and his mom Julia weren't that well off. Yes, Peter did earn more than me, but he came from a very humble background. His field wasn't good enough to make him a millionaire. Peter did hold some resentment towards it. He and Julia liked sophisticated and expensive things. He often complained about not having enough money. I was always glad to help them out with the little allowance my dad gave me. I even let Peter and Julia move into my house after marriage, but neither Peter nor Julia were happy with my house. They said, "It's such a shame that you live in a small house. Your dad literally lives in a mansion. How come you bought such a small townhouse?" "I don't earn a lot, Peter. Dad lives in a mansion because he has lots of money. I'm a simple office employee earning a moderate salary. This house was difficult for me to buy as well. Dad helped me out with the down payment." "Well, if he helped you out, he should have got you a better place. I'm sure your mom had left him something to give you when you became older." "I'm not entitled to anything, Julia. Whatever my mom left behind is my dad's now. She died suddenly, so there was no will. I don't mind if I don't get anything. I'm happy with the way things are." "That's a ridiculous thing to say, Zoe. I sure would have loved to inherit a lot of money. You know what? Your dad should trade houses with us. He lives alone, so he doesn't need the space anyway, right, Mom?" "Yeah, Peter's right, Zoe. You can ask." "Absolutely not. That house is my dad's, and he deserves to live comfortably as long as he is alive." "Well, he will be alive for long now that he's sick. We can wait and compromise for a few years and see what happens. Ultimately, everything will be yours after your dad dies. You will have plenty of money to buy a big house and more." The way Julia and Peter were already making plans to spend my inheritance was super disturbing. It also didn't help that they regularly asked me to ask my dad for more money. It's not like we were hurting for cash. Peter and Julia simply wanted the millionaire life, even if they weren't one. Honestly, I was getting tired of their behavior. However, the real drama happened after my father passed away. My dad's cancer took him away from me. Pretty soon, I was devastated but got little support from Peter or Julia. They were only concerned about the date of the will reading and didn't even help with the funeral. Hell, they refused to attend the funeral because my dad was no one to them. I was heartbroken and furious at that point. My dad's words kept coming back to me. I was getting suspicious of them and started to have doubts about their intentions. I was afraid that they were really after my inheritance money. They were not allowed to be in the reading of the will. Peter and Julia said, "Why the hell are we not allowed to read the will? This is ridiculous. Lawrence was my own father-in-law." "Yes, this is ridiculous. We are family and should be present for this event. We have the right to know what Lawrence left in the will. At least my son should be allowed to be there." "Your son is not in the will, Julia, so he cannot read the will." "Why are you two so obsessed with inheritance? You didn't even come to the funeral." It was funny how my dad was suddenly family when it came to getting an inheritance. I was pretty annoyed at Julia and Peter. What was worse was that they started to hound me as soon as I got back from reading the will. They were not allowed to see the will. I had a hard time dealing with the grief of losing my father, but I got no words of support or sympathy from them. They simply wanted to know about my inheritance. Julia asked me, "So we have been wondering about something for a while now. How much inheritance did you receive from your parents? You must have got a lot of money. How much money did you get?" "My parents unfortunately didn't leave me any money in my inheritance, so I received 0. "What? You didn't get any money? But your parents were rich. They should have left you something. I don't believe that you didn't get any money. I'm sure you are lying to us. Oh, there is no way your parents didn't leave you a single penny." "No, Peter. There was no money in my inheritance. The will didn't even mention me getting any kind of money. You can check my bank balance in a few days and find out. But what about their riches? Who will get those? You are their only child." "I don't know about that, Julia. The lawyer just told me that I didn't get any money. It's fine by me. It was my parents' money, and it's up to them who they would give it to." "That is ridiculous. You need to fight for the money. It should be yours." "There is no money, Peter. They didn't have much money in the end. Whatever was left was given to charity. They have been planning this for a while now." Julia and Peter looked very pissed by what I said. I had no idea why they were being this weird about my inheritance. I almost told them the full details, but something stopped me from doing it. There was this creeping doubt in my mind that my husband and mother-in-law were up to something. I waited for them to digest the news. When Julia and Peter kept pressuring me for more information, I put my foot down. I told them firmly that I didn't get any money and even offered to show them my account in a few days. Well, a month passed, and nothing showed up. In the meantime, Peter grew very restless and stopped being affectionate with me. He was always checking my account and constantly hounding me for information on my inheritance. I was starting to see where this was going. Finally, one day, I decided to put an end to it. I showed them my bank statements and said, "See, I told you that I didn't receive anything. I'm not hiding any secret inheritance money from you. Do you believe me now?" Wow, our years of hard work just went down the drain then. So his parents weren't rich, and she didn't even get $100 in the will. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this. I can't believe this either, Mom. I stayed in this marriage for nothing. I married Zoe for nothing. It was all a waste of time. What the hell does that mean, Peter? Why are you talking like this? Why do you think he's saying these things, Zoe? Who the hell would marry you without thinking about the money? My son simply married you so that we can bank on your inheritance. Now I see that you didn't even get a penny. I can't believe I wasted 5 freaking years on a useless girl like her. I could have done so much better. I was stunned to hear them speak that way about me. I could finally tell that Peter married me for money. My parents were right about him and his mom. They were freaking gold diggers. I was so freaking done with my husband and mother-in-law. I was breaking inside, but what they said next turned me into stone. Julia looked at Peter solemnly and said, "What is done, Peter. But now it's time for you to divorce Zoe. There is no reason why you should stay with her anymore." You will have time to find a new rich wife. This time, we will make sure she actually has some money to her name. Are you freaking kidding me, Julia? You are asking Peter to divorce me over money. Peter, are you going to listen to her? Of course, I would listen to her, Zoe. I married you so that I and my mom could have a comfortable life. We grew up poor, and I didn't even go to college. I had no way of earning a lot of money. So, you pretended to love me and then tricked me into marrying you. You thought that my parents would give me lots of money that I would readily share with you. Yes, that's what I thought. It was the only way I could give my mom the life she wanted. But now I see that my efforts were in vain. Mom's right. I need to divorce you and keep looking. I was stunned by what Peter said. He said those things so nonchalantly that I started to question my own sanity. Julia and Peter went on to express their frustration at my marriage and myself. I didn't hear a word after a while. I was too busy coming to terms with what they just threw at me. Their total lack of reaction and Peter's sudden shift in behavior were both depressing and angering to me. After a point, I was so mad that I wanted to scream and throw things. However, I didn't do any of that. I calmly said, "Okay then, Peter. If a divorce is what you want, you will get it. I was never the one to say no to your demands. I might as well give in to your demand now as a last favor. So, you will agree to a mutual divorce. It'll save us both a lot of money. By the looks of it, you don't have much to go on anyway. Don't think of this as an opportunity to get alimony from my son. We will fight you tooth and nail before you give up that dream. You better preserve your lawyer fees and agree to a mutual divorce. It'll be best for you." You're right. I don't have a lot of money right now, so I decided something. I will agree to a mutual divorce, but you have to sign a clause saying that we won't share any of our assets with each other. That's not a problem at all. You don't have much, and neither do I at the moment. If you can forego alimony, I'll agree to sign a divorce and won't claim anything from you. Me and Peter discussed the details of the divorce and made sure we were on the same page. I could see that Julia and Peter were both happy about me not making a fuss out of the divorce. I guess they didn't expect me to be so calm about it. Truth be told, ever since that day, I have been crying on my way to and from work. I used to sit in the parking lot of my office and cry for an hour before and after work. Peter never noticed my puffy eyes or even asked why I was leaving early for work and coming home late. Julia didn't even bother looking at me after she discovered that I had no money. All of their behavior just made me even more determined to get out of the marriage as soon as possible. I actually had Peter and Julia move out of my house to a rented space in the neighborhood. They soon settled in while we waited for the divorce to finalize. True to his word, Peter didn't demand a share of my house. I also didn't ask for alimony. In his eyes, it was a fair deal. Well, he had no idea just how far I made things out to be. He came to know about it on the day our divorce was finalized. I went over to his new rented space to drop off my wedding and engagement ring. So, I just wanted to return these to you since the marriage only brought bad times in my life. I don't want to have any memory of it. Are you sure you want to return it? I mean, you might need the money after all. It's so funny, you know so. You must have laughed at our poverty before. Look where you are now. My son is being generous and giving you the rings. You might need to sell them when your stupid job doesn't pay enough. We want Mr. Rings. They're cheap ones anyway. What would I need to sell the rings for, money, Julia? You don't have to be embarrassed. So we already know how your parents didn't leave you anything. I guess they lost everything due to poor financial decisions, leaving their daughter destitute. At that point, I laughed very loudly in her face. Julia looked confused, and so did Peter. I could tell that Peter was somewhat annoyed by his mother's behavior, and he was also surprised at my laughter. Julia said, "Why the hell are you laughing, Zoe? Did I say something funny?" It's freaking funny how you think I'm destitute, Julia. It's also funny that you think my parents lost all their fortune. Well, of course, you're destitute. Your parents didn't even leave you a penny. They surely messed up and ruined your life by not leaving you an inheritance. I never said that I didn't get an inheritance, Julia. I simply told you that I didn't get any money. My parents did, in fact, leave me plenty of inheritance. What the hell does that mean? You have an inheritance. I'm so confused. My parents could see you and Julia for the little gold diggers you two are, so they made a secret clause in their will. It said that I would receive no monetary inheritance. Instead, I was given this entire neighborhood as my inheritance. What? You own this neighborhood now. How is that possible? We would have known about your inheritance if this was true. We even signed the lease with an estate manager who didn't tell us the name of the owner. My parents wanted me to wait for a year before I got my inheritance. They wanted me to test you two and see if you are really with me for money or love. Well, of course, you failed the test, and now you won't get anything from me. Also, the estate manager was appointed by my parents to take care of the property before I inherited it. They were smart people, you know. That is impossible. I don't believe a word you're saying. You're just embarrassed because you don't have money anymore. Oh, really, Peter? Is that what you and your mother have concluded from this? Well, why don't you call your landlord and find out from him? Don't worry, we would do that. Then everyone will see just what a big liar you are. Julia and Peter called their landlord and asked about what I said. Since their landlord was the estate manager, he told them everything. Julia and Peter were stunned. They looked really panicked. After cutting the call, they said, "You lied to us. You tricked us into thinking that you don't have anything, but you own the entire housing society now. How dare you trick us so? You wanted all your riches to yourself, so you tricked Peter into divorcing you and made him sign papers that he wouldn't claim anything from you." I laughed at their audacity to turn this one on me. It was finally dawning on them that they had messed up royally, and now it was time for some sweet karma. I said, "It's funny you accused me of tricking you too, Peter. You tricked me into marrying you by telling me that you love me. Julia, you helped your son in this plan, and you were the one to tell him to divorce me. If anyone here was being a scammer, it was you two. As for my inheritance, you asked me how much money I got, and I answered truthfully. This was all a misunderstanding. So, what happened is in the past. Why don't we just try again in the new light? We did spend 4 years together. It would be a shame to throw it away. So now you want me back in your life. Funny how you were desperate to start afresh with a new girl. I hear that you are already seeing someone rich. Don't worry, I'll inform her about what a snake you are." Peter and Julia started to beg me not to mess up this new relationship. Peter told me that since I wasn't ready to give him another chance, I shouldn't mess up his future. I told him to freak off. Also, I informed them that I will kick them out once the property is transferred to my name. They panicked at that and started to beg me even more. In the weeks that followed, Julia and Peter showed up at my house to beg me to forgive them. Peter and Julia already have an eviction on their record, so it is unlikely anyone would give them rent. The only reason they were staying on my property was that I asked the estate manager to allow it. I also called Peter's new victim and told her everything. She was horrified by what Peter and Julia did and broke up with him instantly. She even showed me the texts. After this fiasco, Peter and Julia beat down my daughter, called me names. I promptly called the police and had them off my property. After I got my inheritance in my name, I kicked them out very swiftly. They didn't expect me to go through with the threat. They did show up on my property again, and the police were called. The cops gave them a stern warning, and I filed for a restraining order. Turns out the entire town knew about what happened. They were essentially disowned by friends and had to leave the city to start afresh. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my new wealth and am finally free from gold-digging leeches.
In the quaint Midwestern town where I, Elena Martinez, lived, life had a rhythm as predictable as the ticking of an old clock. But ever since my mother passed away, that rhythm had been disrupted by the uninvited intrusions of two people: my mother-in-law, Helen, and my sister-in-law, Rachel. They had a knack for appearing at my doorstep just when I craved solitude the most. "You know, Elena, it's quite rude to keep us waiting at the door," Helen would say, with a tone dripping with passive aggression. I could see Rachel smirking beside her, her eyes scanning my living room like a hawk. Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone, I'd reply, my voice strained with forced politeness. Their visits had become a dreaded routine. Each time they arrived, they expected to be entertained and catered to as if they were royalty. And I, a mere servant in my own house. We're just here to keep you company, dear. You must be so lonely without your children, Helen would chide, settling herself comfortably on my couch. Rachel would follow suit, lounging as if she owned the place, and then would come the most irksome part. Elena, why don't you order us some steaks? We can't have our visit without a proper meal, Rachel would suggest, her voice sweet yet commanding. But it's almost 4 p.m., I would protest weakly. Helen would wave her hand dismissively. Nonsense, dear. It's never too late for a good meal. And make sure it's from that expensive place downtown. We deserve a treat, don't we, Rachel? As I begrudgingly placed the order, watching the numbers on the bill climb, I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. These steak dinners were bleeding me dry, yet I couldn't muster the courage to stand up to them. It was a financial strain I could ill afford, but Helen and Rachel seemed oblivious to my plight. What made it worse was my husband Michael's indifference. Whenever I tried to discuss the matter with him, his responses were dismissive at best. They're family, Elena. It's just a few steaks. Don't make a big deal out of it, Michael would say, avoiding my gaze. But it's every day, Michael. And it's not just about the money. They're taking advantage of our hospitality, I would argue, my frustration evident. Elena, they mean well. You're overreacting, he would conclude, effectively shutting down any further discussion. This pattern continued for 2 long years. 2 years of unannounced visits, expensive meals, and a growing sense of resentment. It felt like I was trapped in a cycle with no escape. But little did I know the real storm was yet to come, a storm that would change everything. The routine continued, each day blending into the next with Helen and Rachel's unrelenting visits. However, one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, Michael came home with a look on his face that spelled trouble. Elena, we need to talk, he said, his voice unusually stern. Sensing the gravity in his tone, I braced myself. What is it, Michael? He took a deep breath and, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. My parents and Rachel's family are moving in with us next week. You need to clear out your room. I felt the room spin around me. What? Michael, this is our home? You can't just decide that without discussing it with me. Michael's expression was cold, unyielding. It's decided, Elena. They need a place to stay, and it's high time we do our part for the family. But where am I supposed to go? My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and hurt swelling within me. You figure it out. Maybe you can stay with a friend, he said dismissively. This was my family home, passed down to me from my parents. To be told I had no place in it was more than just an insult. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. I stood there, numb, as Michael continued. You're always complaining about Helen and Rachel. This way you won't have to deal with them anymore. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I realized then that the man standing before me was not the Michael I had married. He had become a stranger, one who valued his family over his wife. As Michael walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit room, a fire ignited within me. A fire of anger, yes, but more than that, a determination to stand up for myself. I'll clear out the house, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me, but not in the way you expect. Michael paused, turning back with a smirk. I thought you'd put up more of a fight, but if you're being sensible for once, that's good. He didn't understand. He couldn't see the resolve that had taken hold in me. For years, I had been the dutiful wife, bending over backward to accommodate his and his family's whims. But not anymore. The next morning, as Michael left for his business trip, I took my first step towards freedom. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had found the night before. My voice was calm, my instructions clear. Yes, I'd like to schedule a pickup for all my furniture and appliances, I said, a sense of empowerment growing with each word. And I need it done before the end of this week. As I hung up the phone, a sense of exhilaration washed over me. It was the beginning of my revenge, a plan meticulously crafted to turn the tables on those who had wronged me. Michael thought he had won, but he was gravely mistaken. The house would be cleared out, yes, but it would be empty for him and his precious family. I was taking back control, one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I coordinated with movers, arranged for the sale of furniture, and secretly packed my personal belongings. Every item that held sentimental value to me was carefully boxed up, ready to be transported to my new temporary refuge, my son's apartment in the city. As the movers worked, the house began to echo with the emptiness of its soon-to-be barren rooms. Each piece of furniture that left the house felt like shedding a layer of the life I had built here. But with it, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The day before Michael's return, the house stood empty, a hollow shell of its former warmth. I took one last look around, memories flashing through my mind, of laughter, of tears, of moments cherished and now left behind. But this was no time for nostalgia. It was time for retribution. I left a note on the barren kitchen counter, its words succinct. Michael, as per your request, I have cleared out the house. Good luck with your new living arrangements. Elena. With that, I turned my back on the life I had known and headed to the city, a mix of apprehension and excitement for what lay ahead. Upon arriving at my son's apartment, his welcome was warm but tinged with concern. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I've never been more certain," I replied, my resolve unwavering. That evening, as anticipated, my phone rang. It was Michael, his voice a cocktail of confusion and rage. "Elena, what the hell have you done? The house is empty." "Yes, Michael, you said to clear out my room. I took it to mean the entire house," I responded coolly. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Where are you? What about all our stuff?" "I've taken what's mine. The rest is for you to figure out," I said, a sense of satisfaction creeping into my voice. "You can't do this to me, to us." Michael's voice cracked with desperation. "Funny, I thought the same when you decided to kick me out of my own house," I retorted. The line went silent for a moment before Michael hung up. I knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start to taking back my life and dignity. Sitting in the quiet of my son's apartment, I realized this was more than just revenge. It was a statement that I was no longer the Elena who would be walked over and disregarded. This was a new chapter, one where I would be the author of my own story. The next morning, the gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains of my son's apartment, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. My phone rang, the caller ID flashing Michael's name. I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught. "Elena, you've got to come back. This is madness." Michael's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm not coming back, Michael. You made it clear I wasn't wanted," I replied, my voice steady. "You can't just sell all our things and leave. What about us? What about our marriage?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Us? Our marriage?" I scoffed. "That ended when you chose your family over me in my own home." There was silence on the other end. I knew I had hit a nerve. It was then that I revealed the full extent of my actions. "Also, Michael, I've started the process of selling the house. As you so eloquently put it, it doesn't matter who it originally belonged to." "You can't do that, Elena. It's my home, too." His voice was rising in panic now. "Not anymore, Michael. And since you're so concerned about family, I'm sure Helen and Rachel can help you find a new place." The line went dead. I knew this wasn't the end of it, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. Later that day, Rachel called, her voice dripping with venom. "You backstabbing witch, how could you do this to us? Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place you expected me to go," I replied coldly. "You and Helen were so eager to take over my home. I'm sure you can figure something out." "You'll pay for this, Elena. You think you're so clever, but you're nothing without us," Rachel hissed before hanging up. Their threats and pleas continued over the next few days, but I remained resolute. I had spent too many years being manipulated and undermined. It was time they faced the consequences of their actions. As I started my new job in the city, a sense of liberation enveloped me. I was no longer the doormat Elena, but a woman who stood up for herself. The drama and chaos of my past life felt like a distant memory as I embraced this new chapter. In the end, my revenge wasn't just about emptying a house or selling off property. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and dignity. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were left to deal with the mess they had created, while I finally moved forward, free from their toxic grasp. Weeks turned into months, and my life in the city started to take on a rhythm of its own. The calls from Michael, Helen, and Rachel became less frequent, their voices losing the battle against my newfound resolve. I had started to build a life for myself, one that was free from their manipulation and control. One afternoon, as I sat in my modest but cozy apartment, my lawyer called with news. "Elena, the court has finalized your divorce, and the house, it's legally yours." Michael's claim was denied. A wave of relief washed over me. This was more than just a legal victory. It was vindication. It was proof that I had been right to stand up for myself, to fight back against the injustice that had been thrust upon me. But how? That house is all I have. Michael's incredulous voice echoed through the phone later that day. "You made your choices, Michael. You chose your family over your wife. Now you live with those choices," I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the closure I felt inside. "But Elena, where will I go?" "I have nothing," he pleaded. "That's not my concern anymore, Michael. You should have thought of that before," I replied before hanging up. In the weeks that followed, rumors reached me through friends still living in my hometown. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had been forced to move into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Their once comfortable lives had become a daily struggle, a stark contrast to the luxury they had once taken for granted. I heard about Helen and Rachel's constant bickering, their relationship strained under the weight of their new reality. Michael, it seemed, had taken to gambling, hoping to win back some of their lost fortune, but only sinking deeper into despair. These stories, once a source of pain, now seemed distant, almost foreign. I had moved on, building a life that was mine and mine alone. My job in the city was fulfilling, and my evenings were spent exploring my newfound freedom. One day, as I walked through the bustling city streets, I bumped into Anthony, a friend from my hometown who had also moved to the city. We shared our stories, finding solace in our mutual experiences. "Elena, it's incredible how much you've changed. You're like a completely different person," Anthony said, admiration in his eyes. "I had to change, Anthony. It was the only way to save myself," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. As we talked, I realized that Anthony and I had more in common than our past. We both had been through trials that had shaped us, made us stronger. And in that strength, we found a connection. Life had taken me on a journey I never expected. I had faced my fears, stood up to those who had wronged me, and come out stronger on the other side. My story was one of transformation, of a woman who reclaimed her life from the ashes of her past. And as I looked ahead, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. With my head held high and my spirit unbroken, I stepped forward into my new life, a life where I was the author of my own destiny.
My name is Ashley, I'm 32 years old, and I married the love of my life, Bobby, 5 years ago. Bobby is the most wonderful person I've ever met, kind, fun-loving, and someone who makes me feel special every single day. However, the same cannot be said about his mother, Catherine, who, from the very beginning, seemed to have a problem with me. I understand Bobby is her cherished son, and she wants to protect him, but her protective nature often crosses the line. Catherine has a talent for pushing buttons under the guise of innocence, provoking reactions, and then playing the victim, a behavior that many might recognize in someone they know. Unfortunately for me, that someone is my mother-in-law. I was raised to value directness and open communication, traits that stood in stark contrast to Catherine's approach. These qualities of mine were what attracted Bobby to me. He's gentler and more reserved, a perfect complement to my outspoken nature. They say opposites attract, and in our case, it's true. My background in life coaching has given me insight into human behavior, and it's clear to me that Catherine, despite her claims, does not always act with good intentions. Our personalities clashed from the start, and our first meeting set the tone for our relationship. It happened during a dinner with Bobby, his father Jeffrey, and Catherine. Out of nowhere, she commented on my eating habits, suggesting I should eat less. Her remark was so unexpected that everyone fell silent. I was mortified, my face burning with embarrassment, while Jeffrey looked down uncomfortably, and Bobby, visibly upset, confronted his mother. Catherine tried to backtrack, claiming she was only offering advice and referencing old photos Bobby had shown her, where, according to her, I looked better. Despite my instincts to address the comment directly, I held back, not wanting to make a scene at my first meeting with Bobby's family. Instead, I forced a polite smile and thanked her, burying my frustration. I wanted so badly to make a good impression, but the encounter left me shaken. As time passed, Catherine's behavior only worsened, her antagonism grew, and our interactions became more strained. I hoped that showing her how much I cared for Bobby would help ease the tension, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. On the bright side, my relationship with Bobby's father, Jeffrey, blossomed. He was kind and welcoming, and it was clear Bobby had inherited his gentle nature. Bobby's extended family and friends, including his lifelong buddy Wayne, also embraced me warmly. I felt supported by everyone, except Catherine. Her efforts to undermine me peaked during our wedding planning. She insisted on controlling every detail, from my hairstyle to my dress, even suggesting I mimic her own bridal look from years ago. When I politely declined, she outright insulted me in front of my bridal party, calling me ugly. Though she quickly tried to backtrack, the damage was done. Jeffrey, thankfully, stepped in to put an end to her outbursts, but the sting of her words lingered. Her attempts to overshadow the day didn't succeed, thanks to the love and support of Bobby's family and friends. Still, the emotional toll of her actions weighed heavily on me. Over time, her negativity began to drain my vibrant energy, and I realized something had to change. Fast forward to today, 5 years into our marriage, and we found ourselves back at Bobby's childhood home for a Sunday dinner. Catherine had invited us, along with Bobby's childhood friend Wayne, hinting at an important announcement. Though I was skeptical of her motives, what unfolded that evening was truly unexpected. The evening took an unexpected turn when Catherine, with a theatrical flourish, announced her big news. She had planned a family trip to Florida for her upcoming birthday and waved a confirmation letter triumphantly. Excitement rippled through the room, with Bobby's face lighting up at the mention of Florida, a place he'd always dreamed of visiting. "That's incredible," he exclaimed, his enthusiasm mirrored by the others around the table. Gratitude filled the air as everyone celebrated Catherine's generous gesture. But just as the mood reached its peak, Catherine turned to me with a blunt, chilling statement. "Oh, actually, you're not coming." The words hung in the air, the room falling silent as confusion spread across every face. Bobby, visibly taken aback, demanded clarification, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "What do you mean she's not coming? That can't be right." It quickly came to light that Catherine had deliberately cancelled my ticket, claiming it was due to last-minute arrangements and a desire to avoid extra charges. My heart sank as the realization hit. My presence had been planned for, and then just as easily erased, without a single word to me. Tension bubbled over as the others voiced their outrage. Wayne and I sat quietly, observing the growing chaos as Catherine's reasoning was pressed for. Finally, under the weight of everyone's demands, she revealed her true motive. She wanted to spend her later years surrounded by those she felt closest to. "You just don't make that list," she stated coldly, her words cutting through me like a blade. The room erupted. Bobby, furious, demanded an explanation for her blatant exclusion, while Catherine weakly tried to justify herself. "Wayne is like family," she argued, pointing to him as an example of someone she deemed precious and cherished. Her logic was as insulting as it was flawed. Bobby wasted no time in calling her out. "Wayne isn't even blood-related, yet he's on the list? And Ashley, my wife, isn't?" His voice trembled with anger and disbelief. "How can you say she's not part of this family? She's my wife, Mom. That makes her family, whether you like it or not." Catherine's dismissive smile faltered as Bobby's words struck a nerve. Her attempt to justify her favoritism only deepened the divide. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to me, Catherine's included. Her smugness disappeared, replaced by a flicker of unease. "This isn't about family or last-minute arrangements," I continued. "This is about respect, or your complete lack of it. I may not have been part of your life for as long as Wayne, but I am your son's wife. That should mean something, and I refuse to let you diminish that any longer." The room was still, the tension palpable as my words sank in. Bobby reached for my hand, his grip reassuring as he stood by my side. "Catherine," for the first time, seemed genuinely at a loss for how to respond. In that moment, the dynamics of the room shifted, and the cracks in Catherine's facade began to show. I laid bare the truth of the past 5 years, the blatant dislike Catherine harbored for me, her unbearable behavior, and her narcissistic tendencies. It was evident to everyone, not just me, when Catherine attempted to silence me with a thinly veiled threat to watch my words. It only fueled my resolve. I declared my intention to leave a place that had become a battleground rather than a home. But before stepping away, I turned to Bobby, my husband, and reaffirmed how much he meant to me despite everything. I urged him to join the family trip to Florida, acknowledging the complicated bond he shared with his mother, driven by love despite her flaws. Facing Catherine directly, I laid out an undeniable truth: her efforts to push me away would never succeed. My love for her son tethered me to this family, regardless of whether she accepted it. When I accused her of an unhealthy obsession with undermining me, her expression faltered. It was a nerve struck too precisely to ignore. I called out her relentless attempts to diminish me, despite my consistent kindness and patience. My parting words were a declaration of resilience and independence. While Catherine might have decided I wasn't part of the family and didn't belong in Florida, I affirmed my unwavering place in Bobby's life and, by extension, in the family. I promised to remain steadfast for Bobby, Jeffrey, and even Wayne, drawing a clear and unyielding line with Catherine. This confrontation was more than a moment of defiance. It was a turning point. For the first time, Catherine's sharp tongue failed her. Her usual quick retorts were nowhere to be found, leaving her in stunned silence. I knew I had finally made an impact. As I prepared to leave, I shared a tender moment with Bobby. He offered to drive me home. Concern etched across his face, but I reassured him of my well-being and encouraged him to stay for the family discussion about the trip. Retrieving my purse from the kitchen, I found Catherine there, seemingly having retreated to collect her thoughts. Her request for me to leave swiftly was expected, echoing her earlier hostility with an added layer of animosity. I ignored her, unfazed, and reached for my purse, only to notice a letter beside it, unmistakably in Catherine's handwriting. At first, I hesitated. What could this letter contain? Her bitterness, perhaps? Or was it something entirely unexpected? I assumed the letter was related to the Florida trip. Driven by a mix of curiosity and lingering spite, I decided to glance at it. Addressed to Wayne, the letter began with affectionate words, painting a picture of a close bond between Catherine and him. As I read further, the tone shifted dramatically. Catherine expressed a diminished love for her son Bobby, contrasting it with her enduring affection for Wayne. This revelation was shocking, suggesting a clear favoritism toward Wayne over Bobby. The implications were deeply unsettling, exposing a family dynamic far more fractured than I had imagined. I was torn between the impropriety of reading someone else's correspondence and the weight of what I had uncovered. The letter demanded attention, it couldn't be ignored. Realizing the significance of the discovery, I carefully considered my next steps. Everyone who needed to be involved, Bobby, Wayne, and Jeffrey, was still in the house. The question now was how to address this without deepening the existing tensions. The weight of the decision bore down on me. After scrutinizing the letter once more to ensure I hadn't misunderstood its contents, I returned to the dining room with it in hand. The words were as shocking as they had been upon my first reading. As I entered, the room quieted, and all eyes turned to me. Jeffrey, ever the peacemaker, quickly attempted to smooth things over. He apologized for Catherine's earlier behavior and reassured me that I would join them on the Florida trip. He dismissed Catherine's actions as a temporary mood, confident he could persuade her to reconsider, but his reassurances were unnecessary. I had uncovered something far more pressing. The concern in Bobby's eyes was unmistakable. He likely feared the recent confrontation and ongoing strain with his mother had pushed me to my breaking point. In our private moments, Bobby had often expressed amazement at my patience, marveling at how deeply I loved him despite everything. I met his worried gaze and silently resolved to protect him from what I had read. When I inquired about Catherine's whereabouts, Jeffrey explained she had retreated to nurse a headache, likely a result of our earlier confrontation. While her tendency to prioritize herself was a familiar annoyance, this time, her absence felt like an obstacle. What I had to share required her presence. Yet the urgency of the situation and the encouragement of those present pushed me to proceed without her. The growing anxiety etched into Bobby's expression made it clear that delaying any longer would only exacerbate his stress. "Fine," I said, conceding to the urgency of the moment. "Let's do this." Drawing a deep breath, I began. When I was in the kitchen, retrieving my purse, I found this. Holding up the letter, I paused, letting its presence sink in. What I read, my voice faltered briefly, but I pressed on. Changes everything. The weight of Catherine's words hung heavy in the air as I explained the contents of the letter, careful to reveal the details with sensitivity. The room was silent except for the sound of Bobby exhaling sharply, his expression shifting from concern to pain. The revelation struck deeply, unraveling years of buried dynamics and forcing an undeniable truth into the open. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just about Catherine's actions or the letter itself. It was about the future of our family, what we could rebuild, and what might be forever lost. Gathering my resolve, I prepared for the storm that was sure to follow. I shared the shocking contents of the letter with Bobby, Wayne, and Jeffrey. As I read aloud, the words hung heavily in the room, exposing Catherine's deep-seated resentment toward me and the drastic actions she planned to take against her son. The letter detailed her preference for Wayne over Bobby, her decision to disinherit Bobby in Wayne's favor, and her baseless blame of me for the supposed rift in her relationship with her son. The revelation was jarring. Catherine's bitterness and readiness to sever ties with Bobby painted a chilling picture. When I finished reading, the room was thick with tension, each person grappling with the betrayal in their own way. Jeffrey, ever the mediator, was on the verge of tears. Wayne appeared stunned, struggling to process the extent of Catherine's plans. Bobby, however, was a storm of fury and disbelief, his emotions oscillating between hurt and indignation. The realization hit Bobby hardest. He wrestled with how his mother could justify cutting him off while blaming me for her actions. It was a harsh wake-up call for all of us, laying bare the depth of Catherine's manipulation. The ensuing discussion was emotional and heated, with Bobby venting his frustration over her toxic behavior. It became clear that something had to change. 3 weeks passed after this revelation, leading up to the much-anticipated Florida trip. Unbeknownst to Catherine, a plan had been set in motion, a direct response to her divisive actions. On the morning of the trip, Catherine found a letter from Jeffrey by her bedside. The note, written in a tone of normalcy, instructed her to meet the family at the airport and suggested that all was proceeding as planned. Eager to begin the trip, Catherine hurried to the airport, unaware of the seismic shift in family dynamics caused by her letter. At the airport, her frantic search for her family was a physical manifestation of the confusion and isolation her actions had sown. Assuming they were already aboard the plane, she boarded, clinging to the hope of reuniting with them in Florida. After a long journey, Catherine eagerly called Jeffrey, ready to celebrate together. Instead, Jeffrey revealed the truth: they hadn't gone to Florida at all. The family was still at home, gathered together, a unified front against the discord she had tried to create. Her confusion turned to shock as Jeffrey explained the change of plans. He confronted her about the letter, exposing her attempts to cut Bobby out of her will and the unjustified animosity toward me. Catherine's denials and excuses were dismissed by the family, who collectively made it clear that
My name is Nancy, and there's a world out there, unknown to me until childhood, when I first glimpsed it on TV. Wild animals roamed landscapes I'd never seen, and people spoke languages foreign to mine. The desire to explore this unknown world up close ignited within me, so boldly. I pursued studies abroad during college. My destination, the very unknown world I yearned to discover. Despite the language barrier, the people thrived, and the land teemed with creatures amidst breathtaking landscapes. Eager for others to share in this wonder, I secured a job at a travel agency. Responsible for tour planning, I drew upon my study abroad experiences, managing everything from site inspections to negotiations. Balancing work and personal life, I married Daniel, whom I met through work. Yet, a problem surfaced with my mother-in-law, Barbara. Firm in her belief that women should remain homemakers post-marriage, Barbara clashed with my modern views. Though I respected her perspective, I couldn't let her dictate my life. To evade living under her roof, I proposed buying a house to Daniel, believing it would alter perceptions. Daniel readily agreed, and we acquired a home. However, Barbara's visits became frequent, disrupting our weekends with noise and unwelcome opinions. Despite the tension, Barbara nonchalantly announced an upcoming trip, assuming I'd join. When I hesitated due to work commitments, she accused me of neglecting family. Feeling cornered, I acquiesced, though begrudgingly. As tension simmered, Barbara, with a sly tone, reminded me of my profession, insisting I handle the trip arrangements. Reluctantly, I obliged, concealing my irritation. The destination? London, where my study abroad journey had unfolded. I still have many connections there. It might be challenging for other regions, but perhaps I can manage London. All right, I'll give it a try. I've already got the plane tickets, so just book the hotel. Odd, you've booked the flight, but not the hotel. I managed to get the tickets by redeeming my card miles for first-class seats. Barbara grinned with evident delight. Daniel, leaning in, remarked, "First class? Seriously, Mom?" "Yes, it's a first-class trip abroad," Barbara confirmed, her grin widening. "We'll depart at 9:30 p.m., so you can work until the last minute," she added cheerfully. Although her enthusiasm seemed genuine, I couldn't ignore the mountain of branded goods piled on the sofa. "I see," I said, catching on to the implication of her joy. Realizing the need to secure accommodations quickly, I decided to leverage my old contacts from my study abroad days to secure a hotel referral. Making a call, I arranged for accommodations for 4 people in 2 rooms. On the day of the trip, the short notice left me unable to take the day off work. Barbara instructed me to meet at the airport by 6:00 p.m. If I wrap up work soon, I can make it, I reassured myself. Suddenly, Barbara called. "Hello, Barbara," I answered. "Nancy, are you done with work?" she inquired. "I'm just leaving the office now, so I'll be at the airport after 6:00 p.m. "Oh, that's too bad," Barbara responded. "Well, we're actually leaving at 6:00 p.m. "Ah, no way," I exclaimed, rushing back to my desk to check the flight schedule. London. I found the 9:30 p.m. flight I initially heard about, but there was also a flight leaving after 6:00 p.m. Could it be this flight after 6:00 p.m.? Yes. So the family is going without you. I felt furious. How could she plan so thoroughly to leave me out? Unforgivable. But showing my frustration would play into Barbara's hands. I had to hide my feelings, even if it meant putting on a brave face. Clenching my teeth, I said to Barbara, "I'm the one who booked the hotel, so Daniel knows the hotel name. You can't do anything now." I could hear Barbara laughing on the other end. Annoyed, I said, "Go without me then." "That's better." "We don't need a useless wife like you," she retorted. "Useless? What do you mean? Don't you know what you neglect? Housework for your job." "Daniel is complaining," she continued. "True, I'm busy with work, but I've never slacked off on housework." "Why would Daniel complain? Can I speak to Daniel?" I asked. Barbara's mocking voice was followed by Daniel's greeting. "Hello, what's up, Nancy?" What do you mean you're complaining about me? I asked him. Just that you're always at work and neglecting me, he responded. Neglect? I prepare meals, clean, and do laundry. But you think you're doing it all yourself, right? That's not true, I retorted. Shouldn't you respect me more? Listen to me? Do things for me, I questioned. I know a wife who supports her husband is valued. It's convenient for the husband, but that's not all there is to a marriage, I continued. I never badmouthed Daniel in public, always praising him, but not when it's just the two of us. But we need to speak our minds when alone. Otherwise, our relationship would fall apart, and I'd become nothing but a servant to Daniel. Yet he kept complaining about me, I explained. So, you think you can act all high and mighty because you earn more? I challenged him. Not at all, he replied. That annoys me, and you're leaving me behind for that? I asked incredulously. Yeah, consider it stress relief. I'll bring you a souvenir, so don't worry, he assured me. That's not the point, I insisted. Clearly, Daniel was taking me for granted. If that's how it is, I have my own plans. Fine, enjoy the trip. Will do. Bye, I concluded, hanging up. Daniel sounded happy as he hung up. I was livid. I couldn't stand the self-centered Daniel and Barbara. Enjoy your trip without me, but be prepared. Even if you come back crying and apologizing, I won't forgive you. I rushed out of the office with my mobile phone, calling someone. Hey. Hello, it's Nancy. Are you free? I need to talk about that hotel booking. With the trip canceled, I have plenty of time. I'll settle everything now. I ran around with that determination. Then, the next evening, exhausted. I got home, and right then, the phone rang. Hello, Nancy, said Barbara, sounding quite angry. I knew the reason, but pretended not to. Barbara, are you enjoying the trip? I asked. This is no time for that. We can't check into the hotel. Did you have a reservation? You made the reservation, didn't you? Barbara's tone grew more agitated. I canceled it because I wasn't going, I replied. Huh. What then? Where are we supposed to stay tonight? Barbara's frustration was palpable. I don't know, I admitted. Barbara's angry voice came through. But she's in London. Her anger over the phone isn't scary at all. That's tough, being abroad without a hotel. You never know what might happen, I remarked. Wait, help me? Barbara sounded panicked. Then, a faint voice in the background. There's a canceled room. Anthony's negotiating for us to stay there, Daniel's voice reassured. Is that true, Daniel? Barbara demanded. Looks like it'll be fine. You see, Nancy, the room was available because I canceled it, Daniel explained. But this was all part of my plan. My real aim was something else. Glad there was a vacancy. Thought you'd be smug about canceling our hotel, didn't you? I retorted. No, not really, Barbara laughed loudly. Frustrated, aren't you? You can admit it if you're upset. I just canceled it because I wasn't going. Putting on a brave face. How pathetic. Typical of Daniel's useless wife, Barbara continued. Tired of listening to her bragging, I quietly hung up the phone. She probably didn't even notice. I smiled a little at that thought. Anyway, just a few more days to endure. I braced myself and had dinner. A few days later, on my way back from a certain place, Barbara called again. Hello, what's up, Nancy? What's going on again? She asked. Not again. What's wrong with this hotel? I inquired. In short, they stayed in the room I canceled, thanks to Anthony's negotiation. They were supposed to stay for 4 days and check out today, but there was a problem. They were billed £8,000 by the hotel. What's the issue? I asked. It's £2,000 per night, right? That's about $2,500 per night in dollars. Ridiculous. It's for 2 rooms, right? So, about $1,200 per room. You told Daniel it was $300 per room per night. Yes, I did. So it should be $600 for 2 rooms. Why is it 4 times? I was astonished that they stayed without even checking the room rates. Well, I anticipated this, so I set it up accordingly. Anyway, Barbara making a fuss on the phone must be bothering others. I should calm her down. "Hey, Nancy, can you hear me?" Barbara's voice echoed through the phone. "Barbara, can you be a bit quieter?" I interjected. "Why did you lie?" she accused, without reflecting on herself. Exasperated, I began to explain to Barbara. The $300 rate was because I made the reservation. "Huh, so because it was last minute?" she questioned. "I asked a friend who runs a hotel," I replied. "A friend of yours?" she inquired. "Their hotel offers rooms for around $600 for 2 people, I explained. "Then why $11,200? Barbara sounded flustered. "That's the rate for a really nice room. My friend did me a favor," I clarified. "A favor?" Barbara sounded taken aback. When I heard from Barbara, there was no time left for the trip, so I told my friend any available room would do. The only vacancy was an expensive suite. My friend kindly gave a discount. I continued. Barbara left me behind without asking. I immediately told my friend the situation and got the room canceled. But I couldn't just leave Barbara and the others without a hotel, so I asked to accommodate them at the regular price if they came. I knew Barbara, having heard about the hotel from Daniel, wouldn't check the price. And I was right. "Come on, you should have said that. Yelling won't help. Please make sure to pay," I urged. "We're not paying, Nancy. You pay," Barbara retorted. "But if you don't pay, you'll be arrested," I warned. Arrested. Of course, troubles abroad can be messy. "Are you okay with that?" Barbara seemed at a loss for words. As I was about to hang up, thinking I had won, Barbara shouted, "Don't mess with me. You'll regret this when I get back." "That's fine, but we're strangers now, right?" I responded. "Huh? Why?" Barbara sounded confused. "Well, you said it was a family trip. So since I'm not there, I'm not family, right?" I reasoned. Before she could finish, Anthony's voice came from the phone. "What's all this yelling about? Be quiet. It's embarrassing." Seizing the opportunity, I called out to him, "Anthony, are you okay? How's your cold?" I never had a cold in the first place. What's going on? Anthony's voice was filled with concern. It seemed Anthony took the phone from Barbara. His voice grew louder. "Nancy, can you explain everything?" "I can, actually. I told him everything from the beginning." "I see. So that's why you didn't come." "I'm sorry. I wanted to go." Anthony's voice softened. "No, Nancy, you're not at fault. It's Barbara and Daniel," Anthony affirmed. From afar, I heard a whimper. Barbara and Daniel seemed frightened by Anthony's anger. Realizing this, an idea came to me. Should I tell Anthony what Barbara has been doing? I thought so. "Anthony, can I tell you something?" I asked hesitantly. "What is it?" Anthony replied. "Barbara comes to our house almost every weekend, and when she throws away receipts at our place, there are piles of them," I explained. "What receipts? For branded goods?" Anthony sounded surprised. "It's fine to buy a lot, but please dispose of the receipts at your place." Barbara wasn't just being noisy at our house. She was secretly buying branded goods and disposing of the receipts at our place to hide it from Anthony, thinking she wouldn't get caught this way. Of course, I concluded. I'm a witness, so it's pointless. But it seemed Anthony didn't know. That's interesting to hear. Also, please tell her to stop bad-mouthing you at our place. She talks about me too. Yes, she says you don't earn much. Daniel, too, calls him a useless dad, I think. Anything else? Anthony prompted. So I spilled all my pent-up frustrations to Anthony. Of course, some of it wasn't directly related to Anthony, but he listened silently. At the end, he apologized to me. "I'm sorry. Now I understand." Understand what? Why Barbara didn't want to use her card to pay for the hotel. Maybe probably because the cost was much higher than she expected, close to her credit limit. "I'm sorry," whoever's voice interjected. "That was unforgivable. All your wasteful spending, Barbara. I want a divorce." "Please don't do that." Anthony's shouting was followed by Barbara's pitiful voice. He also yelled at Daniel. "Daniel, why don't you defend your wife?" "That's Don't come to my house anymore. Reflect on this alone, Anthony said firmly. Yes, sir. Daniel sounded unusually obedient. Probably, he thought being banished from his parents' house wasn't a big deal. That's when I struck the final blow. So, Daniel, looks like you're going to live alone now, huh? What do you mean? Suddenly, Daniel's voice got louder.
My name's Nora Thompson. Tonight, like most nights since arriving in Monte Carlo, I found myself sitting alone at a small cafe on the edge of Casino Square. It's a far cry from the luxurious life I was born into. After graduating from an elite college in the States, all I wanted was a simple break from the world I knew. My father owns a vast empire from hotels to tech firms, but I use my mother's maiden name to keep things grounded and to avoid the spotlight. The evening had cooled when he walked in. Daniel exuded an air of ownership, or at least the confidence that comes from wearing a suit worth more than most people's rent. He pulled out the chair opposite me without asking. "Mind if I sit?" he finally said, though he was already seated. His smile was all charm, probably well rehearsed. "Looks like you're already sitting," I replied, barely glancing up from my coffee. He chuckled, his laugh too smooth. "I'm Daniel, and you are?" "Nora," I said curtly, giving him a quick once-over. Not my usual type, too polished, but admittedly good-looking. "So, Nora, what brings a girl like you to a pricey haunt like this all by yourself?" His tone was teasing, and I wasn't sure if I was amused or annoyed. "Just enjoying my coffee," I answered vaguely. "And you?" I asked. "What's your excuse?" "I could say business, but I'd be lying," he said with a smirk. "Tonight, let's just say I'm scouting for something interesting, and it looks like I might have found it." I raised an eyebrow. "Hope the coffee lives up to your expectations then." Daniel laughed. "Something tells me it's already exceeded them. I wasn't here to make friends or find a fling. Look, I'm not one of those girls who falls for lines if that's what you're aiming for. And I'm certainly not interested in whatever game you're playing." "Who says I'm playing a game?" he asked, his voice lowering slightly. "Experience," I replied. "You sit down uninvited, start with a line. What, do you expect a phone number or a date?" He leaned back, genuinely amused now. You're tough. I like that. Not looking for a number, just conversation. But if it's too much, just say the word, and I'll vanish. I considered him for a moment. Monte Carlo was beautiful but lonely. Maybe a little chat wouldn't hurt. Conversation is fine, but keep it light. We talked for a while. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. He didn't press for personal details, and I didn't offer any. As the night wore on, I realized I was actually enjoying myself. Daniel wasn't like the usual guys who tried to impress me with their wealth or connections. He had an air of someone used to the finer things but not defined by them. Eventually, the evening drew to a close. "Well, Daniel, this was unexpectedly pleasant," I said as I stood to leave. "Surprised yourself, huh?" he asked with a grin. "Maybe just a bit. Good night, Daniel." As I walked back to my apartment, his words lingered in my mind. Monte Carlo had indeed turned out to be full of surprises, and perhaps, just perhaps, I had stumbled upon one tonight. After that first encounter with Daniel, the nights in Monte Carlo seemed a bit less solitary. He had a knack for appearing wherever I was, whether I was exploring the local markets or having a late dinner by myself. His persistence wasn't annoying. Surprisingly, it was quite the opposite. Maybe because he wasn't push-shy, he just seemed genuinely interested in being around me. One breezy evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, he walked over with 2 coffees in hand and sat down beside me without a word. Assuming I wanted coffee, I teased, raising an eyebrow. He handed me a cup. "If I'm wrong, I'll drink both." "Good guess," I said, accepting the coffee. We sat in silence for a bit, the sound of the waves filling the quiet moments. "You never told me what you do back in the States." Daniel finally broke the silence. "Didn't think it mattered." I shrugged. "I work. Right now, I'm just enjoying not working." "Fair enough," he chuckled. "Everyone's got a story, though, don't you think?" Over the next few days, we fell into an easy routine. Daniel showed me parts of Monte Carlo I hadn't explored yet. We talked about everything and nothing: movies, books, our favorite foods. He loved to argue about the best James Bond actor, staunchly defending Daniel Craig, while I was all about the classics like Sean Connery. One day, as we strolled along the beach, he stopped suddenly and looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Nora, I know I'm just some guy you met at a cafe, but these past weeks have been, I don't know, different. Better because of you." I stopped too, unsure how to respond. Feelings were not what I planned on dealing with here. "Daniel, I like hanging out with you. I do. But this is just a break for me. I'm not looking for complications." He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I get it. No pressure. Just know that I'm here, okay? And I think you're pretty amazing." Days turned into weeks, and my time in Monte Carlo was drawing to a close. Daniel and I spent more and more time together. What started as casual walks and talks turned into late-night dinners and early morning breakfasts. It was the last thing I expected, to fall for someone under the Mediterranean stars. Then one evening, he dropped a bombshell. "Come back with me, Nora. Work at my company in the States. I know it's sudden, but I think it could be great." The idea was crazy, completely insane. And yet, part of me was tempted by the adventure, by the idea of taking this, whatever it was, and seeing where it could go. Moving back to the States felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Daniel's offer wasn't just a job, it was an invitation into his life. Suddenly, I was living in an ordinary apartment in an ordinary part of town, playing the role of an ordinary girl who'd lucked out. My father, however, had different ideas about ordinary. He showed up unannounced one afternoon, just as I was unpacking my last box. His booming laugh filled my small living room as he stood in the doorway, towering and larger than life. "Nora, hiding out in plain sight, huh?" He chuckled, giving me a hug that almost crushed my ribs. "So, tell me about this decision. This guy must be something special for you to up and move like this." His tone was light, but I could tell he was probing, doing his fatherly duty to sniff out any trouble. I sighed and sat down on the couch. "His name's Daniel. He's different, Dad. He doesn't know about all this," I said, waving vaguely around to imply the wealth and the complicated strings attached. Dad sat down next to me, his expression serious now. "Nora, you know you can't keep that a secret forever. If he's going to be part of your life, he should know who you are." "I know, Dad. I want to be sure about him before I complicate things. Thanks for looking out for me, though." He ruffled my hair, like he used to when I was a kid. "Always kiddo. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm just a call away. And I've got eyes everywhere, he added with a wink. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjusting to my new job and new life. Daniel was a constant presence, supportive and charming as ever. But there was an edge to him now, a sharpness that came with the responsibilities he carried. One night, over a quiet dinner at my place, Daniel brought up a topic I'd been dreading. Nora, when do you think I'll get to meet your parents? I feel like I'm missing a big part of your life. I paused, the weight of the moment settling over me. Well, my mom passed away a long time ago, and my dad's just a regular trucker. We're not exactly on speaking terms right now. Daniel frowned, a hint of concern crossing his face. I'm sorry to hear that, but whenever you're ready, I'd like to meet him. Family is important. I nodded, appreciating his sentiment, but knowing full well the reality of my father's world, a world I wasn't ready to introduce Daniel to just yet. Life with Daniel moved at a pace I never expected. We were already blending our lives together. My job at his company was going great, and our relationship was deepening. It all seemed like we were gearing up for something big, but I was still taken aback when that big moment actually happened. It was a normal evening. We were at his place, a cozy upscale apartment with views of the city skyline. We had just finished dinner, nothing fancy, just takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. We were sitting on the couch, a documentary about ocean life playing in the background, the kind you watch but don't really watch. Daniel turned to me, his expression more serious than the situation called for. He took my hand and suddenly, I felt my heart race as Daniel took a deep breath. Nora, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through, and everything I want for our future. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah? I love you, Nora. I love everything about you, and I can't imagine my life without you. He paused, swallowing hard, his nervousness palpable. That made two of us. I want to be with you always. Will you marry me? Just like that. No kneeling, no ring box, just straightforward and genuine, just like Daniel. I barely hesitated before replying, yes. The word rushed out almost as a relief. Yes, I will. His face lit up with that wide, infectious grin that had won me over from the start. He pulled me into a tight hug, and we spent the rest of the evening excitedly discussing our future, what we wanted and where we saw ourselves. It was thrilling and a bit daunting, but it felt right. The next challenge was telling my dad. I anticipated him being pleased, but his response was lukewarm at best. Nora, I want nothing but your happiness, he said, his voice heavy with concern. It was thrilling and a bit daunting, but it felt right. The next challenge was telling my dad. I anticipated him being pleased, but his response was lukewarm at best. Nora, I want nothing but your happiness, he said, his voice heavy with concern. But are you sure about this? It's all happening so fast. I'm sure, Dad. He's a great guy. You'll see, I tried to sound more confident than I felt. He sighed. All right, but promise me you'll sign a prenuptial agreement, just to be safe. The word prenuptial didn't scare me. It was just another part of the modern marriage package, especially with someone who had as much to lose as I did, even if Daniel didn't know the full extent of it. Of course, Dad. We'll handle it, I assured him. Good then, and Nora, I won't be at the wedding. I don't want to spoil your story about being a simple girl. Next came the introduction to Daniel's mother. Her reception was icy from the start. During dinner at their family home, she scrutinized me with a look that could freeze the room. Daniel, are you sure about this girl? She doesn't seem like a fit for a family, she remarked bluntly. Daniel tried to smooth things over, but his mother was relentless. A prenuptial agreement is non-negotiable, she insisted. I agreed without hesitation, knowing it would ease some of the tension. Absolutely, I wouldn't have it any other way. Later, we formalized the terms with a lawyer present. Despite these hurdles, our wedding in the Maldives was breathtaking. Standing beside Daniel with the ocean whispering behind us and the sand beneath our feet, I felt a surge of hope. It was just us, our love, and a future we were ready to shape together. Despite the rocky start with family expectations, married life began better than I could have hoped. Daniel and I settled into our new house, a beautiful place with more space than we'd ever need. It was supposed to be the start of our perfect life together. I threw myself back into work, determined to prove that I was more than just the boss's wife. My role at the company had always been challenging, but now there was an added layer of expectations. I was not only managing projects but also involved in key decision-making processes. Initially, Daniel seemed proud. He'd introduced me in meetings with a hint of pride in his voice. "This is Nora, my wife and our project lead." But as the months passed and the projects I led brought in significant profits, boosting the company's profile, something in Daniel began to shift. It was subtle at first, a comment here, a slight remark there. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, he brought it up. "Nora, you're doing great at work. Maybe too great," he said, his voice strained. I looked up from my plate, puzzled. "What do you mean, too great? Isn't that good for the company?" "It is," he admitted, pushing his food around on his plate. "But the guys are starting to say it's turning into the Nora show over there." His words stung. "Isn't that a bit unfair? I thought you'd be happy that we're doing well." "I am happy," he said, though his tone was uncertain. "But it's a lot. You know, everyone's always talking about you, about how you handle things. It makes me wonder." The conversation marked the beginning of a series of challenges between Daniel and me. As the business grew, so did the strain in our relationship. Daniel's once supportive demeanor was now tinged with resentment. I couldn't comprehend why he was upset. Wasn't he the one who had encouraged me to take on more responsibility in the first place? Things took a turn for the worse when his mother came to stay with us for a few weeks. Her presence brought with it an old-world attitude that I had always managed to avoid. She made offhand remarks about my work, questioning how a wife could be so absent from home. "You're always at the office, Nora. When do you have time to take care of your husband?" she would say. I tried to shrug off her comments, aiming to keep the peace, but her words only deepened the growing rift between Daniel and me. It seemed that no amount of professional success could mend what was slowly unraveling at home. The more I achieved at work, the more our marriage suffered. One evening, Daniel came home with a grim expression. "Nora, I think it's best if you leave the company. We need to focus on our family, and your role there is causing too much tension." "Leave the company? But why? I've been contributing so much," I said, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "It's for the best. You can focus on the house, maybe start that garden you've always talked about," he replied dismissively, as if he were deciding on something trivial rather than my career. The next day, I discovered that he had let go of all our household staff. Housekeepers, cooks, gardeners. It was all on me now. "You wanted to be more involved at home. Here's your chance," he said coldly. I wasn't afraid of housework, but the way this was thrust upon me felt wrong. This wasn't the loving, caring man I had married. This was someone else, someone intolerant and controlling. His mother, who was still staying with us, seemed to relish the situation. "It's good for a wife to focus on her home," she would say, smirking slightly whenever Daniel talked about my new role as a full-time housewife. As I adjusted to this unexpected turn in my life, I felt a deep sense of shame. A shame that I hadn't seen this coming. A shame to admit that maybe my father was right about Daniel. When Daniel suggested a trip to Monte Carlo to rekindle what was left of our spark, I was hesitant but hopeful. That hope quickly faded when his mother announced she would join us. "It's been ages since I've traveled," she declared loudly, as if it were a decree that couldn't be opposed. Daniel welcomed her with open arms, never considering my feelings. We rented a small house in Monte Carlo, charming but costly, and it quickly became my prison rather than a retreat. From the start, Daniel and his mother treated the city as their playground. They rented luxurious cars, visited exclusive boutiques, and dined at the finest restaurants, while I was left to manage the household. They demanded home-cooked meals, reducing me to little more than a servant in our holiday home, cooking and cleaning while they enjoyed the city. As days passed, Daniel's mother's comments grew sharper, her tone more venomous. "Really, Nora? Living at someone else's expense must be quite the life," she would sneer, her words a slap disguised in a smirk. Daniel never defended me. Instead, he laughed, his laughter a betrayal that echoed around the cold walls of our temporary home. I felt isolated, the city's sparkle muted by the shadow of their disdain. One evening, we passed a grand old-style hotel, its facade a reminder of a world of elegance and respect. Daniel's mother, her voice dripping with envy, remarked, "Lucky billionaire Harris. Imagine owning such a hotel, ruling over a palace like that." That night, at a restaurant overlooking the sea, the last vestige of my patience crumbled. As we sat down, she waved the waiter over with an imperious flick of her wrist. "For Nora, the cheapest dish will do. No need to spoil her with extravagances she doesn't deserve." she declared loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. Daniel's response was a casual chuckle, his agreement signaled not just by his words but also by a dismissive wave of his hand. Good call, Mom. Let's not go overboard. Humiliation washed over me like the waves crashing on the rocks below. I rose from my chair, the clatter of the sea echoing my turmoil. Facing them both, my voice steadied but louder than I intended. I said, I will not tolerate this any longer. My hands trembled, but my resolve was firm. I'm divorcing you, Daniel. The cold air of Monte Carlo felt warm compared to the chill of betrayal as I walked away from the restaurant. Instead of apologizing, Daniel and his mother followed me with insults. As I quickened my pace, my mother-in-law's voice rang out sharply. Just look at her, a beggar, unworthy of my son. My heart raced, but before I could get far, Daniel caught up with me and yanked my purse from my shoulder, his fingers clenching it tightly. This is my money, Nora. Go on,